House will come to order. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. Madam Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate file herewith transmitted. Senate file number 1740. The message is signed Thomas S. Bodden, Secretary of the Senate.
First reading of Senate files.
First reading of Senate file number 1740, an act relating to education policy. Jordan moved that Senate file number 1740 and House file number 1306, now on the general register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison. Hearing no objection.
Hearing no objection.
So ordered.
So ordered. Calendar for the day. Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is House File 2563. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 2563, number 3 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to legacy, the first engrossment.
I recognize the author of the bill, the representative from Hennepin, Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, House File 2563 is this year's legacy bill. In 2008, Minnesotans passed the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment. That goal was to protect our waters, to restore our habitat, to support our parks and trails, and to preserve our arts and cultural heritage. And this bill does just that. Looking across this floor, I can say that every single one of your districts is made better by the work funded in this bill. This bill allocates about $779 million in projects. Within the Outdoor Heritage Funds, there's $160 million for this fiscal year. We followed the recommendations of the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council, about 47 projects, preserving 107,000 acres of wildlife habitat. The Council has heard the legislature and is focusing on restoring and enhancing habitat rather than acquiring more land. In fact, acres being restored and enhanced are up 70%, and acres being acquired with PILT are down about 80%. Within Article 2, the Clean Water Fund, there's about $304 million to clean up our waters. These are recommendations of the Clean Water Council and Governor. There are also 61 projects and programs being funded in this bill, much of which go from state agencies to local governments and conservation districts to do the work on the ground. In Article 3, there's Parks and Trails Fund, $130 million to strengthen our parks and trails system. The bill follows the long-standing 40-40-20 split for the state parks, metro parks, and greater Minnesota parks and trails. This year, we have about $500,000 in spending on a partnership between our parks agencies and the Wilderness Inquiry to get kids outside exploring our parks. In Article 4, finally, we have the arts and cultural heritage, about $180 million to celebrate our shared cultural history and support arts. The State Arts Board receives about its statutory 47%. We work to fund the core state agencies and organizations we traditionally have. We directed large amounts of new money to competitive grant programs rather than direct appropriations. And we also prioritize many of our member projects in these competitive grant pools from both sides of the aisles. And finally, I also want to thank our staff, both partisan and nonpartisan. Without them, this work can never really be done. So first, Janelle Taylor from House Research, Mary Davis from House Research, Brad Hagemeyer, House Fiscal, Amy Zipko, Mike Mozon, Chelsea Axelson, Chelsea Ray, Karina Nelson, Grace Johnson, and as well as our committee members for all their hard work, thoughtful conversations, and bipartisanship, including Vice Chairs Hussein, Scraba, and Co-Chair McDonald, Representative McDonald. And with that, Mr. Speaker, that is my introduction to the bill.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File number 2563.
Third reading. Discussion for the bill. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Falconer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not on the committee, but I'm a big fan. So thank you for all the work that you did in bipartisan fashion to get this to the floor. I raised to place emphasis on clean water and public land stewardship, and I am in support of this legacy bill. It is one of these things that we get to discuss here and debate that literally affects each and every person in Minnesota and that enjoys overwhelming bipartisan support across the state. We all love our parks and trails, and we all need clean air and water. And in fact, Minnesotans love our outdoor heritage so much, we overwhelmingly voted to tax ourselves in order to fund these. The phrase "water is life" very much applies to the provisions within the Clean Water Fund portion of this bill. While the Trump-Musk-Vance regime, or whoever's in charge at the moment, while they're repealing the Clean Water Rule, also known as Waters of the United States, or WOTUS, and gutting the Clean Water Act, defanging the EPA and seemingly every regulation on the books and agency charged with protecting our clean waters, in Minnesota at least, thanks to this bill, we can be proud that we are funding programs making sure our shared waters are safe for drinking, support wild rice, safe for fishing and swimming and other recreation activities. This bill supports our more than $13 billion yearly outdoor recreation-based industry, so lake resorts can welcome people, our outfitters and camps can get people into the wilderness, fishing charters can get people on Lake Superior, and so much more that is a part of our way of life in Minnesota. And for our public lands, while the Trump administration also redesignates the primary purpose of all federal lands, including the Superior National Forest, Grand Portage National Monument, even Revisors National Park, and the boundary waters themselves for mining and extraction. He's also designating the primary purposes for our 2 national forests for being clear-cut by logging for that single industry at the detriment of all else: recreation, habitat, hunting, grounds, conservation, everything else. But in Minnesota, through this legacy bill, we are choosing a balanced approach that protects our shared public lands for multi-purpose use, which, yes, can and should include logging and mining, but also prioritizes protecting our public lands for conservation and outdoors recreation as well. And yesterday, we just learned that the ramifications of the Trump-Musk chainsaw cuts to the Forest Service and USDA that caused the closure of
Mr. Speaker, point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What order of business are we on?
Thank you. We're on the third reading for House File 2563. Representative Falconer.
Thank you. So I'll continue for what this does for Minnesota. While we just learned that yesterday that the ramifications of the chainsaw cuts to the Forest Service and USDA that caused the closure of 2 of the busiest Forest Service offices and issue boundary waters permits in Ely and Grand Marais, which causes chaos as the boundary waters permitting entry season is about to open. Minnesotans, as well as people across the country who travel to the boundary waters and spend their money in our state, will be scrambling to figure out how they're going to pick up their canoe trip permits, placing a burden on outfitting businesses to issue permits that take around a half hour each to process, to no financial gain to the outfitters themselves, and actually at the expense of lost staff, time, and productivity. But in Minnesota, thanks to this bill, I'm proud to say, we are working to keep our public lands protected, open, and accessible, which will be more important than ever while our federal public lands are being made inaccessible. Our state public lands and waters belong to all of us, everyone in this chamber, and everyone in Minnesota alike. They are our lands and waters. State parks, state regional trails, metro regional, and greater Minnesota regional parks.
Mr. Speaker, point of order. I
State your
rise
point of
under
order.
Mason's.
State your point of order.
I rise under Mason's section 112, reading of papers. When papers or something printed have not been printed or presented to the House or the Committee for Action, a member does not have the right to read them once we've begun to and are being compelled to vote for them. We don't read scripts here on the floor. You can stand up and give a floor speech on your own.
Representative Falconer.
I'll continue with my speech, as many do, that happens to be written down so I don't miss points that I want to make. These are our public lands, and this bill protects them. Our state's parks, state and regional trails, metro regional and greater Minnesota regional parks, and other open natural spaces are getting funding they need through this bill to keep these cherished places protected, open, and accessible to all. So, to finish out, as POTUS destroys WOTUS, as Trump tries to turn our federal public lands into a toxic mine waste dump, as Trump denies access to the BWCA, causing chaos and permit delay, as the federal regime guts the Clean Water Act, we, for all of Minnesota, are making a pact that we stand by clean water and public lands for all Minnesotans. In the land of 10,000 lakes, which actually is officially 11,482, or over 22,000 lakes if we went by Wisconsin's standard of counting glorified drainage ponds as lakes. Anyway, our lakes and waters on state and regional parks and recreation areas and other state lands literally define our state. They define our way of life. They drive a significant portion of our economy and enrich all of our lives. I thank the committee for this bipartisan work on this bill and enthusiastically encourage you to vote green.
I recognize the member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I have been debating whether I would be voting for this bill or not. I have given it consideration, and sometimes you vote for a bill because of what's in it, and sometimes you vote for a bill because of what's not in it or has been purposely excluded. Members, here in a few days, the 30th of April will be the 50th commemoration of the fall of Saigon, the ending of the Vietnam War. In this bill, in one section, there is a by-name request for one people group who were impacted by the war in Vietnam, but there are no other mentions of 3 other very important groups that were impacted by the war in Vietnam, who stood by our American servicemen and women and were amazingly helpful. Here's who are not in this bill: the Vietnamese, the Lao, and the Cambodian. And I brought a bill to the Legacy Committee asking that we commemorate them, and it devolved into a fairly hotly contested committee hearing. Representative McDonald called me later and thanked me, I think, sort of a sideways kind of way, for bringing the bill to committee. But members, these people group that I have spent time with as a member of the API board, they feel that they have been excluded. Now, I'm hopeful that there is a grant in here that is going to the Humanities Center that will be able to help these 3 very important people groups feel like they have been honored and recognized by the state of Minnesota. Not only did they stand up and stand beside the American servicemen in Vietnam in the war in Vietnam, but then they chose to relocate here to our state to invest themselves in our community, to become an important and active part of our state. And on the 50th anniversary of the ending of the Vietnam War, they have gotten nothing. And I am hopeful that the competitive grants that may come forward will give them something. But there are other times in this bill where one people group is mentioned on a number of different occasions. We should be applying things fairly and equally to the people who were impacted, the people who stood beside us, and the people who have invested in the state of Minnesota. And because of that exclusion, I am voting no. And I would encourage as many of you as can, if you feel importantly about this, that you should as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Momani Hiltsley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, I rise today in strong support of House File 2563, a bill not only upholds our shared values, but defends the very soul of Minnesota. Of the 4 areas under the Legacy Committee charge, today I rise to speak specifically about the Arts and Culture Heritage Fund. This fund has done more than preserve our history. It has expanded access, elevated the voices of local creators, and made sure that from these smallest towns to the heart of the Twin Cities, Minnesotans see their stories reflected, honored, and celebrated. For me, this isn't just a policy. As an immigrant, I come to this country carrying not just my dreams, but my culture, my history, and my identity. I know what it feels like not to be unseen. I know what it means to wonder if there is a place for my story in the fabric of America. The arts and cultural institutions here in Minnesota say, I belong, you belong, we all belong, all of our stories matter. But today, that very foundation is under attack, and the Trump administration slashes funding to arts and culture. It's not just a budget adjustment, it's an attack on our identity as Minnesotans. Those cuts are not neutral. They are intentional. They seek to silence voices, erase histories, and send a dangerous message to our Black, Brown, immigrant, Indigenous, rural communities, and our LGBTQ+ family that our lived experiences, our culture, and our very existence are somehow expandable. When institutions like the Science Museum of Minnesota and the Walker Art Center loses federal funding, the impact is felt far beyond exhibit halls. It reaches into our classrooms, robs students of creative learning opportunities, and chokes off spaces where future leaders can find their voices. Those cuts dismantle the very soul of who we are as Minnesotans. And I refuse, and we must refuse, to stay silent. Here in Minnesota, we know that arts aren't charity, they are a necessity. They spark empathy, they fuel innovation, they build bridges where others build walls. And they remind every Minnesotan, no matter their background, they are part of this story together. House File 2563 is our stance, is our shield, and it's our promise that we will not let partisan attacks define who gets to be chosen, seen, valued in this state. So let's be clear, Minnesota. Minnesota will not bow down to censorship. We will not surrender to cultural erasure. We will instead, we will invest, we will protect, we will fight for the creativity, the diversity, and heritage that make Minnesotans strong, and that's what this bill does. Lastly, I want to extend gratitude to Chair Vang and Chair McDonald for your leadership. In a season full of hard decisions, you led with courage, clarity, and conviction. You honored the values that brought all of us here, and even if we didn't get what we all wanted, we worked together to meet in the middle, honoring the will of the people that elected us to serve. I urge a green vote on House File 2563 because our future deserves nothing less, and we are stronger together. Thank you, Speaker.
I recognize the member from Crow Wing, Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I have a few comments about today's bill. I wanted to point out a few things that I am glad to see are here from the Clean Water Council's recommendations. There's money for those that would like to continue to maybe check their well water and have testing made available. That's been something that has been included for many years. It's included in this bill today on the floor. I think that's a great tool for folks that want to monitor their groundwater. There's also grants for counties and SWCDs to do the good work, the boots on the ground work to improve water quality around the state of Minnesota. I wanted to also mention my appreciation to our co-chairs, McDonald and Vang, for a number of things that aren't in the bill. The House language before us today does not include earmarks or direct appropriations like some previous bills have. And it's always better, in my opinion, to have a competitive process for those coming to look for resources, to work on environment, natural resource-related projects, and the Clean Water Council projects also very specifically where there's that check and balance to confirm that these organizations are reputable and that taxpayer dollars are being elevated to their highest and best use. I think that because of our co-chair's leadership, changes have been made in the other body to reflect that integrity, and I wanted to make note of that today on the floor as we move this bill forward. So thank you, and I'll be voting green.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Lilly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and member of the Legacy Committee that can't probably speak today. This legacy bill continues so many of the great things that we've been able to do with this bill in the past few years. amazing projects in the water space. You know, every year making our water more swimmable, drinkable, and swimmable. And it's really quite exciting if you dig in and can see the projects that are able to be done with this money. In the outdoor heritage space, so much money is going to protecting, restoring, enhancing land all over the state of Minnesota, and that's for all of us. We can get out there and enjoy it, whether it's hunting or bird watching or just even helping preserve streams and clean water. So much of our state is, you know, interconnected in ways that we don't even know, like Minneapolis water and the east, you know, comes from up north. And so this bill does so much great work in that space and keeps it going. In the parks and trails area, which I deeply love it, you know, there's some amazing work that's done all over every district. I was glad Chair Vang said everyone's district has stuff in this bill, and it's certainly in the parks and trails is just amazing work that we can be really proud of, and that work has kept going. In the arts and cultural space, there's great work all over the state, going to grant, whether bigger institutions all the way down to maybe a local potter that does work and is able to get a grant. Or, but one of the things, given that we celebrated Mary Murphy this week, there's money in there for, which she was former chair, she started money for libraries. And there's some money in there, for, which the current chairs kept going, and money for county fairs. I don't know if you remember, that was pretty special where Mary got her first kiss. So, not that that's all important, but I think it's kind of sweet on the same week we're doing this. I just really want to give a hats off to the staff. The nonpartisan staff really do a good job. And the nonpartisan and the partisan on both sides of the aisle are top notch. But at the end of the day, I'm really proud as a former chair to thank Chair McDonald and Chair Vang for, you know, in this modern space to, you know, where we're at right now, to develop a good bill and keep up the good work that we can all be proud of for the state of Minnesota. So I'd say you better vote green.
I recognize the member from Roseau, Representative Burkle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to speak quickly on the Outdoor Heritage Fund part of the bill. Appreciated the time I've spent the last 2 years with Representative Lilly on the committee, and we'll miss him, but looking forward to Representative Vang's presence there as well. Also recognize Representative Heinzman in his past service there. The council spends a lot of time vetting these bills in July through November, a lot of extra work, ranking those projects, vetting those projects. And by December, the council comes up with those recommendations, and that's what you see in this bill. Many hours spent by the council debating and reviewing every proposal, and no process is perfect, but this one's pretty darn good. You can find those projects, everything's online, watch those YouTube videos, but it'll tell you what was done, when it was done, how it was done, who did it, what the cost is, everything's really transparent. So there's a whole list of those projects in the outdoor heritage portion of the bill. You can see those listed. I won't go into detail. Beyond that, as Representative Lilly just mentioned, the county fair grants, I think it's a great part of the bill. There's also a provision that I carried for Minnesota FFA that's in the bill for $250,000. Really good project recognizing their 100-year history and the importance of agriculture in our state. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask everyone to vote green if they can, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hussein.
Good afternoon, and as the Vice Chair of Legacy Committee, I'm honored to stand in front of you today, an important step forward for Minnesota House File 2563. As the Minnesota House of Representatives, through the work of the Legacy and Finance Committee, we dedicated to preserving our state rich history, protecting our natural resources, investing in the cultural future of all Minnesotans. The advancement of Legacy Finance Committee This bill reforms our commitment to safeguarding Minnesota lakes, rivers, park, and trail. Also, let's not forget supporting arts and cultural institutes that enrich our community. This bill ensures that every Minnesota, from urban neighborhood or the greater Minnesota, has access to this bill. Clean water, green space, cultural experience that reflect our diverse state of Minnesota. I wanted to extend my gratitude to thanks to our chair, Chair McDonald, and Chair Samantha Vang, for putting together a great bill that reflects throughout the state of Minnesota. They haven't left anyone behind. They try to do the best they can to listen to our committees and work together as a team. Your leadership, collaboration, inspired made this process both productive and joyful. Let's not forget our staff for the nonpartisan, and both has done a great job. We could not have done anything without them. They made our job so easy, and we want to thank you for the great work that you have done. And also, the members from both sides. We debated thoughtfully, and we worked together as a team to get this beautiful bill that reflects and invest for the state of Minnesota. Let's continue this work with the same heart and energy for the rest of those bills. I will encourage all my colleagues for both sides to go vote for this bill green, because I think, and I'm sure, and I've seen it, both chairs have worked so hard to make sure that this bill is inclusive. Thanks for having me, and everybody please vote green.
I recognize a member from St. Louis, Representative Scraba.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The legacy bill is a good bill. There's good in it, there's bad in it, so that makes it a good bill. What it does is it continues to do what the citizens of Minnesota voted for, to help natural resources and the culture and the arts. One of the things, just a couple that I want to speak on, like parks and trails, for me, there is never enough money for trails. You could put $1 billion in trails and I'll spend it on trails, because the more people are outside doing things, the better our society is, because we get to have hands-on with what we are trying to protect. So parks and trails could get more money and I'd be happy. Arts and culture, I come from a district that benefits a lot from this. We have a lot of arts and culture issues going on in northern Minnesota that people come up to visit, and it's an opportunity for everybody to see how different we really are, but how we are the same. So I truly support the arts and culture. The Clean Water Fund, need I say more? The federal government actually is helping us on the Clean Water Fund because it matches with our money that we put in. So we do work together, and we can make a difference in northern Minnesota with this money. And a really big issue, again, for me in the Clean Water Fund is they get $16 million for PFA, the Public Finance Authority. Could be $16 billion for me, because I sit on capital investments and I see all the communities that come in looking to clean their water and wastewater. This is another pool for them to draw from, and it's still not enough. Our communities need more, so if we could use more, I would definitely support more. The outdoor heritage, I commend the group with working on more enhancements to the properties rather than purchasing them and getting them out of the tax rolls. So it works to an advantage for all of us. I'm a hunter. I like going to hunt on farmers' lands that allow us to hunt there. I also like public land, but I understand in down here, that ship sailed a long time ago. Where I'm from up north, it's all public and very little private. So I've learned how to use the enhancements that we're operating on to help wildlife and everything else in Minnesota. Other than that, I think this is a good bill. I appreciate all the working together. That is one of the, for me personally, one of the cool things that I get to experience at the Capitol is I sit on capital investments and legacy. And by the sheer who benefits from both are everybody. There's not it shouldn't be political, and it's very little political. It's, yeah, typical. I have an opportunity to watch this, to see it happen in front of me, and I'm like, I have no problem working across the aisle. They have no problem working with us. We get a lot of good legislation done communicating, and I look forward to working with everyone again. I think this is a great bill. I wish everyone would vote green. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
Mr. Speaker, members, today is our legacy bill. I just want to speak to the taxpayer, actually. I think you had many members speak to the merits of the bill. We've crafted a very good bill. Matter of fact, our House version of the bill is so good. This is where you say, how good is it? How good is it? Thank you. That the Senate has adopted already some of our wise choices when it comes to our arts and culture section by not crafting a bill that had a plethora of earmarks. I think that's one thing as lawmakers that we got into a little bit of trouble the last few years of having too many earmarks into that section of the bill of arts and culture. So what we've done so wisely, thanks to Chair Vang and our committee members and our staff, is we put a pool of money together, over $17 million, and put it into the humanities section. You probably already read the bill, so I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But what this humanities will be responsible for is vetting all these projects, these important projects around the state that'll come to them and asking for funds. They'll merit-based. They'll have more than 10 minutes per hearing to hear a bill or an idea. They'll have ample time to look at the issue, look at the project, and award a grant if they deem it both constitutionally, first and foremost, and importantly and necessary. I think that's one of our achieving accomplishments that we had on the legacy bill. Now I want to speak to the taxpayers. That's you out there watching TV if you are, and every one of us in the room that spends money. I was not a big advocate of the legacy bill to begin with. I've been here 15 years. Some of my members are tired of me saying this, but this has been my mantra. And Representative Lilly, thank you for listening again for the 10th time. In 2008, when this was on the ballot, I voted against it because if clean water was so important to Minnesota, then we wouldn't need to raise a tax to clean our water. What if the amendment had failed? Would we not have worked to get clean water? So I was not a fan of it. And I only voted once in my 14 years here for a legacy bill. And then Speaker Demuth asked me to be a chairman. So Speaker Demuth, you're not here right now, but I thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a chair because I have observed the importance of what this money does to the state of Minnesota, especially when it comes to the clean water issues and the outdoor heritage of preserving our outdoor heritage, our lands, our environment, our resources, our habitats. These groups that put these together, the Parks and Trails, the Lessard Sams, the Clean Water, meet for a whole year. Many of them are volunteers, and they look at each and every project. Oftentimes they visit each and every project to deem it, is it necessary, is it important, is this a good use of taxpayers' dollars? And then they bring it to the legislature. And then we are to dissect it, to ask questions, and to either accept it or reject it. And as you see in the bill that I hope that you'll vote for today, we have adopted their policies because they did great work to making sure that each and every project, right, Representative Lilly, is very important and was merit-based, and they did their work and due diligence. So we thank you for that. I think a couple of things that we did that I think is very wise, Chair Vang, is that we put in there for all nonprofit groups that want to come to the Capitol and ask for money, that they disclose their 990s. We have witnessed throughout this last session that some of the 990s come back with some high numbers in nonprofit organizations. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but when you're asking for taxpayer dollars, it should be probably required, and it will be in this bill. Furthermore, we put in language, and I think you'll always appreciate this, that the arts and culture funds cannot be used for capital improvements and construction. This is arts and culture and our history of Minnesota. And we did see bill after bill after bill that was going to go used to construction, almost like a bonding bill. That is not constitutional. Therefore, we put that in the bill. So to the taxpayers, I just want to say, as a defender of your dollars, and I'm not self-righteous by any means, but because I've been an opponent of this and now an advocate, I have seen the great use of the taxpayer dollars when it comes to the parks and trails, which are so important, that bind us together as a peoples, and the clean water, which is necessary to sustain life. We got a responsibility to take care of water and to make sure that it's drinkable and safe for our children and grandchildren. And then the heritage, the outdoor heritage, Lesage Sams, they do some great work to make sure that our environment and our lands are protected so we can pass it on to the next generation. So I indeed am proud of this bill. It's not perfect. There's some people that were left out of the bill, unfortunately, but we have work to do. Representative Nash, we will fight for those folks that fought for us 50 years ago during the Vietnam War. That war is not over as far as fighting for their funding, for their recognition, and their contribution. You have my word. I'd like to thank, in closing then, that's always the best part of a speech when a politician speaks. In closing, I want to thank our nonpartisan staff who, without them, we could not do this job. As already been said by Chair Vang and Representative Hussein, Vice Chair, but I want to mention it again because it is worth mentioning at least 2 or 3 times. And it is Janelle Taylor, Brad Hagemeyer, and Mary Davis, our nonpartisan staff. They make sure that we don't fight in committee. And they did a great job of doing that. We didn't fight. We had a great committee, didn't we, Chair Vang? And then also on your staff, your side, you had Mike Moselon, Grace Johnson, and Chelsea Ray, researcher. They did a great job making sure that we were well-informed before we took our vote. And then on the GOP side, I have my own Karina Nelson, who's my CLA and has taken so good care of me the last 4 months. I am very grateful to your good work in taking care of my constituents back home as well. And Chelsea Axelson, our researcher, she's a great researcher and makes sure I have all the information before I get up and speak publicly in a microphone. So thank you, Chelsea. And then Ms. Zipko, Amy Zipko, is a CA, and she is phenomenal. This is her 2nd term, I believe, on the committee. No, 3rd? 4th? 5th? 4th. Well, she's an expert in legacy, and I followed her advice and her expertise immensely. So for that, I am grateful. Chair Vang, you and I really worked well together. When I first was asked to chair, I first asked Speaker Demuth, well, is Representative Lilly going to be the chair? Because if he's going to be chair, I will volunteer to do it. And they said, no, they won't let him. He's done. He's an old has-been. But we have a really good one. No, I'm joking. He knows that. We have Chair Vang, and you and I worked very well together. And it shows what we can do in Minnesota to work bipartisan together to solve issues and problems and spend the people's money wisely. So Vice Chair Vang, or Chair Vang, Co-Chair Vang, thank you. Members, I hope that you'll vote green. If you don't, I understand, because I was there for 14 years. But I've seen the light. So members, I asked you to see the light. I asked you to see the green light. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion? I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. Over the Easter legislative break, I got the opportunity to attend a conference in Los Angeles. In my conversation with my Lyft driver on the way to the hotel, we started talking about water rights and the issues LA is grappling with after the wildfires that we all have seen and heard on the news. She explained her love for LA and the great mountainscape that divides between the city, that brings this type of, quote, je ne sais quoi, unquote. But she's torn how no one should be drinking the water in LA. Where the wildfires has been at, it melted everything in its path, leaching chemicals and contaminants into the groundwater. She spends about $200 a month buying bottled water. Immediately, I'm thankful about the abundance of water we have here in Minnesota and the investments we make, especially here in the Legacy Amendment, to protect our groundwater and how much more we need to protect our precious resources. It is imperative that we preserve and restore even more of our waters and our habitats so we can improve the quality of life in Minnesota. And I will be remiss not to speak about Minnesota's cultural heritage. Representative Nash spoke about certain groups being excluded in this bill when no one is left out. Both sides agreed that a competitive grant process can be better than directly naming some communities. And so we created and maintained a pool of funding within the Minnesota Humanities Center, increased their funding than ever before, $17.5 million for the community identity and heritage grants that many of our BIPOC and small organizations can receive funding for. And through Legacy, I've gotten the opportunities to hear from many communities that make up the fabric of our state. Speaking from my own cultural heritage, this year marks 50 years since the first arrival of Hmong refugees. We have this saying in our people, because historically, well, even now, we are a people with no actual country of our own. We say, "Nya luon du ya luo zu." "Nya luon du ya luo zu," and it means to be sheltered in another homeland is to become a part of that homeland. As Hmong people, we understand that immigrants and refugees who come to this country, we become a part of that country. We become stewards of our land, caring for our neighbors, and we build a better place to serve our community. This year, we focus on making sure everyone benefits from these funds. There are projects being funded in this bill to protect your constituents' water, to improve habitat in your district, to build significant regional parks in your constituents that your constituents will enjoy, and support your community's arts and history. Members, please vote green.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the name of the members voting remotely.
Baker.
Go ahead, Dave.
Baker.
Dave, go ahead.
Baker votes aye.
Baker votes aye. Swazinski.
Swazinski votes aye.
Swazinski votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 115 ayes and 19 nays, the bill is passed as amended. Well, it's not amended, and its title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 2432. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 2432, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to state government, providing for judiciary, public safety, corrections, and government data practices policy, the second engrossment.
There are amendments at the desk. If there's no objection, we'll let the author explain the bill, and then we'll act on the amendments. I recognize the member from Sherburne, Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bill 2432 is a good bill that has been worked out given the constraints of the situations that we are currently in public safety. We have some good amendments that have been included in this bill, and we worked out what we did in the situation that we had. We have added some language that will make Minnesota safer, as we think it should, and I'd just like to refer now to Co-Chair Moller for her to describe her plans of the bill, but appreciate your support.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Moller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I forget, I do want to thank all of the staff who worked with us on the Public Safety Committee. We have Ellen McDaniel. She is the DFL Committee Administrator. Christian Lawrence, the DFL CLA. Zach Meinertz, the DFL Researcher. John Holtquist, the GOP Committee Administrator. Mary McNamara, the GOP CLA. Isaac Pylon, the GOP Researcher. Our nonpartisan staff, Ben Johnson, Jeff Diebel, John Waltz, and our pages, Sierra and Joe. Also want to thank my co-chair, Paul Novotny. It has been an honor working together with you and with all of the members on the committee. This is a topic that can get very contentious at times, but I think we had really great discussions in our committee, and I think people felt heard, and it was a valuable experience. I do want to highlight just a couple of provisions, things in the bill. The first one is related to funding for victim services. And I see Chair Rarick over there maybe helping pass out letters, I'm not sure. But victim services are really important in our state. They are the services that are provided to domestic violence victims, like domestic violence shelters. We have sexual assault advocates. Mr. Chair, I'm having trouble hearing. Do you mind? Thank you. Thank you so much. They are important for sexual assault survivors, having advocates. Child abuse centers are funded through victim services funding, and general crime. And they are really at a very critical point right now. Federal funding is the bulk of their funding, and it has been uncertain for years, and it is really even at more of a crisis right now. And so I'm really glad in this bill that we could recognize the importance of that and put what dollars we were able to towards that. In addition, working with Chair Rarick and coming up with some creative solutions around funding victim services. I was also glad that we're able to fund important law enforcement training and recruitment efforts with this bill. But I do want to note, as Chair Novotny noted, the constraints we had. We were given a target of $50 million in each biennium, and while that looked good on paper compared to some of the other committees, I will note that it doesn't even come close covering the operating adjustments for our agencies. For the BCA, for example, that means being able to process evidence. It means investigators who are helping investigate violent crimes. For the Department of Corrections, it means being able to pay our corrections officers, which thankfully now are, I believe, very close to full capacity when they were struggling to recruit before. And that means keeping lights on, not only to be able to pay them, but also to provide the rehabilitative services that people who are incarcerated need, so that they would become members in the community again. They don't recidivate, and they have the supports that they need to be productive members of society. So it is still very much a concern for us that even if we put that full $50 million towards the operating adjustment, we still wouldn't have even come close to meeting that operating adjustment. So I do hope more work can be done on this bill in conference committee, but it is a good bill now, and I am looking forward to the discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Myself and Chair Liebling were the co-chairs of the Judiciary and Civil Law Committee, and we have a pretty basic bill here. I want to first start by thanking all of our staff, partisan and nonpartisan, and the pages. Everyone was just a great team to work with this year. I want to thank our members who just, I feel like we did a lot of good vetting in our committee, a lot of good committee work on both sides of the aisle. And what our bill does is we, from a finance perspective, we really tried to hold people's paychecks harmless. The cost of health insurance has been skyrocketing this year. And so a lot of the one-time funding that we had went to hold those paychecks harmless for judiciary employees. We also ask each of our accounts what they were spending, what additional costs they were going to have for leases. So we're trying to be really practical in our approach to the budget. The one small thing outside of that, perhaps, was the Guardian Ad Litem program. A few years ago, that volunteer program was done away with. There are over 170 kids waiting for guardians ad litem, and so they are reinstituting that program, and they needed a couple of FTE units to train those new volunteers. So there's a small spending item for that that will really help our kids. Other policy items, the Met Council kind of had a self-policing bill that they brought to us with data practices that would improve transparency there. Representative Green, a freshman over there, dipped her toe in the data practices realm this year and came up with a really good bill regarding data practices requests. Representative West had a bill related to leftover funding in foreclosure actions, and the sheriff's departments who run those county by county foreclosures were left holding, a few $100,000, and not knowing what to do with it. So his bill addressed that. There were some technical changes to the forensic navigator responsibilities, and that's kind of a broad overview of what our bill does. And with that, I would love to turn it over to my co-chair, Chair Liebling.
I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. And I agree with my co-chair, Representative Scott. This is kind of a basic bill. Our budget was extremely thin, and we did the best we could to try to provide for the employees. I really appreciate that working with Chair Scott. I think we have a lot of agreement around the things that we needed to do in our bill. And I do appreciate that she shares my concern for the judiciary and really the concern about how important it is to have an independent third branch of government and the work that they do. And I think that we here in Minnesota are very respectful of our judiciary. And I think that we get a lot of that respect back from our judiciary, and that is a really good and a healthy relationship, and one that is really worth keeping strong. So I won't add much more. I think Chair Scott did a really good job introducing the bill. We did work hard to vet bills that came to us. A lot of the work of the committee is pretty nitty-gritty work that doesn't make big headlines. Sometimes it does. But often it's just making sure that the things that we pass really do what they're supposed to do and that we understand what they are. And she's been a great partner in that. And I add my thanks to all of the staff and look forward to the debate. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Scott offers the following amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Scott moves to amend House File Number 2432, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A12.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Scott, who will explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this was agreed on by both sides of the aisle in our committee. This is an amendment that was carried by Representative Paul Anderson, and it has to do with transparency with small cities and any agreements or settlements that they might reach with an employee that might have been behaving badly in office, and they had to reach a settlement with that person. Right now, they're exempt in law from having to share that with the taxpayers. The some of the finer aspects of that settlement, and so this just makes them subject as well to being transparent. And I urge members' support.
Is there any discussion on the amendment? I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support the amendment. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Being no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed, say nay. The amendment prevails. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Robbins moves to amend House Law Number 2432. The second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A10.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This amendment has bipartisan support, and we actually tried to do it quickly on the floor last year towards the end of session, but because we had missed deadlines because of when the incident happened, we, Chair Moller and Chair Novotny, decided it would be better to wait and go through the process this year. Briefly, this came as a result of a excessive speed incident in my district where a constituent's grandmother, Sandy Wetterland, was killed because someone was driving through her neighborhood at 90 miles an hour in a 45-mile-an-hour zone and killed her. And during that process, the constituent working with Department of Public Safety realized that there's a gap in statute. And what happens currently is if someone has probable cause to be having committed criminal vehicular operation or criminal vehicular homicide, because drugs, alcohol, or other intoxicating substances were involved, DPS is required to suspend their license and revoke it. But if it's just speed, that is not the case. So they came to me and said, look, we need to tighten this up because there is a lot of cases that just involve excessive speed that do not involve drugs and alcohol, and this is a gap in statute. So working closely with Chair Moller and Chair Novotny, we went through all the hoops, we went through all the hearings this year. My constituent and his family came and testified many times at great heartache to them. And so I'm very pleased that we are able to offer this today in honor of Sandy Wetterland and her family, Matt Whalen, Mark Rowe, and Brittany Rowe, and I ask for your support, members.
Further discussion to the amendment. I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Moller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Robbins, for bringing this bill. It really does close a loophole that's needed, and I am glad that we can incorporate it into our bill today, and I'm going to recommend a yes vote. Thank you.
Any further discussion to the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The chief clerk will report the amendment.
Niska moves to amend House Law Number 2432. The second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A11.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. The A11 amendment is patterned after House File 20, which we debated on the House floor at quite length a few weeks ago. And when we debated that bill, I asked each of us to reflect on the timeless words of Abraham Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address, his call to preserve a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That kind of democracy requires sunlight, and as we are all aware, recently some of that sunlight reached the Attorney General's office. Recently released audio recordings reveal conversations that happened between the Attorney General and individuals who were later implicated, and in some cases convicted in the Feeding Our Future scandal. In those recordings, the Attorney General—
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
Masons 124, paragraph 1, in debate, members must confine remarks to questions before the body and avoid personalities. The debate here is not any individual. It is the policy and the amendment.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Attorney General was asked in those recordings to use his authority to protect businesses under investigation for wrongdoing, and rather than distance himself or remain neutral to allow the legal process to unfold, he responded in those recordings, "Of course, I'm here to help."
Mr. Speaker, point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, there was a point of order, and I didn't hear a ruling or any resolution of the point of order. Was there a resolution to it?
I'll remind the body that there was no ruling made by the Speaker as to the point of order that was just stated. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Attorney General in those recordings even urged the individuals, let's go fight these people. He was offered campaign contributions during that meeting, contributions that he later accepted. The release of those audio recordings raises questions about what's going on in the Attorney General's office that go directly to the need to pass the legislation that we had previously debated, House File 20. Although he has insisted that nothing came of the meeting, his office blocks disclosure of closed investigative
State your point
data.
of order.
Masons 124, we are continuing to talk about an individual, and we are not talking about the policy that is in the bill.
Mr. Speaker, advice.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We'll go back to, I believe it was last year during debate, where Masons 124 Subdivision 2 was brought up on a number of occasions again and again and again, when we had the temerity to use the word or the name Mary Moriarty, and it was then Speaker Pro Tem Her that ultimately ruled that in Subdivision 2, a member, in referring to another member, should avoid using the member's name rather than identifying that member by district. The only protection in Masons 124 is for another member. And the Speaker Pro Tem at the time ruled that another person could be mentioned on the floor of the House without saying that they were being impugned because the debate was germane to them. So please don't try to rise under Masons 124 to try to obfuscate the content of the debate, because the previous, your own Speaker Pro Tem ruled that it was wholly appropriate to use then the name of Mary Moriarty, but also from you all today, where some of your members used the name of the President again and again and again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, advice?
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to point out that all those comments were directed to 124, paragraph 2. What I heard the point of order being raised under 124, paragraph 1, which references personalities, and I heard a lot of personality in that and not a lot of merits. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I was explaining before the Attorney General's former employee interrupted.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. In the back.
State your point of order.
Masons 124 personalities. Can we get a ruling on this, please? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I will refrain from that, but I'll remind the members to leave personalities out of the debate. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Attorney General's office has blocked disclosure of information that would go directly to the question of whether or not anything actually happened under the Energy Policy Advocates versus Ellison case, the exact case that the 811 amendment is aimed at fixing. Transparency isn't just an option, it's essential. It's the foundation of accountability, the safeguard of our democracy, and protects public trust, especially when serious questions like this arise. The A11 will help ensure that what happens behind closed doors in the Attorney General's office sees the light of day. We can protect people's privacy while shining a light on what the Attorney General's office is doing, who is influencing that office, whether it's those under a criminal investigation, nonprofits, corporations, or billionaires with political agendas, because Minnesotans have a right to know when their Attorney General's office is working with them. Minnesotans have a right to know whether the Attorney General is telling the truth, that nothing came of that meeting. That's why the A11 is so important. House File 20 is just sitting on the table. I hope we can take it off the table and pass it. It has been blocked twice on party line votes. We need to pass this bill for exactly the reason that members of the other side want to stop us from talking about this issue today. I hope we can fix this bill. I understand it's not going to be today. That's why I withdraw the A11 amendment.
Representative Niska has withdrawn the amendment. There's an amendment at the desk. The Chief Clerk will report the amendment.
Reimer moves to amend House File number 2432. The second Grossman as amended. The amendment is coded A15.
I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative Reimer.
Mr. Speaker and members, thank you for the opportunity to present this amendment. This amendment helps round out what I believe to be an otherwise good bill. It answers the question that was addressed in this last election, talking about the need for tighter immigration enforcement and illegal immigrants' crime. This amendment accomplishes two main things. The first is that it mandates any illegal immigrant arrested under suspicion of a violent crime as defined by Minnesota statute 611A.036, subdivision 7, even in cases where the county attorney elects not to prosecute, to be reported to federal immigration authorities. Second, this bill prevents state and local entities from actively prohibiting investigations from federal immigration authorities. I think this is an important bill because we've had an election that has spoken loudly on this issue in 2024. And secondly, in Congress, the model legislation is the Lake and Riley Act, which got broad bipartisan support. So I ask for your green vote today on A15. Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
Under Rule 3.21, motions and propositions and amendments must be germane. This amendment expands the scope, introduces a new subject, and I'm prepared to offer advice.
State your advice.
So, Mr. Speaker, there is nothing in the underlying bill on immigration enforcement whatsoever. In addition, the amendment introduces two new sections of law that are not in the underlying bill because they are brand new sections. So if our germaneness standard is that you get to make anything germane by inserting it into the section of law that we are debating, the chapter of law, then that is going to be opening our doors pretty wide. But most egregious of all, this has Chapter 388 in this amendment, which is not in the bill at all. That would require a major change to the title of the bill, which is one of the principal considerations in determining germaneness. And even under the GOP's own rules proposal from earlier this session, a new chapter being inserted into the bill is not germane. This is not a close call, Mr. Speaker, and I ask that you find the point of order well taken.
Further advice.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice. This amendment is certainly germane to the Public Safety and Judiciary Bill. The Chapter 388, just in case anyone's curious, has the title County Attorneys. I think everyone would understand that Chapter 388, even though there's not a provision relating to Chapter 388 yet in the underlying bill, if we're going to talk about county attorneys, the only bill that would be germane to would be the Public Safety and Judiciary Omnibus Bill. Certainly it is the case that we create new penalties, new procedures relating to criminal justice in this bill. The A10 amendment did something very similar to this. It was obviously taken on a bipartisan vote. This bill does not substantially change or expand the scope or purpose of the bill. It doesn't require a major change in the amendment. It doesn't introduce an independent question. It's about public safety and the data practices that we are also dealing with in this bill. So, Mr. Speaker, I urge that you find the point of order not well taken.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
The point of order should be well taken just because the bill, but because the amendment mentions county attorneys, that has nothing to do with this bill. Again, there is nothing about immigration enforcement in this bill. And it's also problematic that you just referenced the A10 that we took, the Robbins Amendment, which we took in good faith in an agreement. And so I really hope that we're not going to go down this line of when we negotiate in good faith, that you are going to use that against us when there is an amendment that is clearly not germane. Thank you.
Any further advice? Seeing no further advice, I'm prepared to rule. I have studied the amendment, I've reviewed the bill, I've considered all of your advice, and I'm ruling that the point of order is not well taken.
Mr. Speaker, I appeal the ruling of the Speaker.
Representative Long appeals the ruling of the Speaker. The
and
15
request
hands.
a roll call vote.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Let me remind the body that a green vote will support the ruling of the Speaker, and a red vote will be overturning the ruling of the Speaker. Any discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. The Chief Clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Baker.
it again. Go ahead, Dave.
Baker.
Dave, go ahead.
Baker votes aye.
Baker votes aye. Swazinski.
Swazinski votes aye.
Swazinski votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 ayes and 67 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the ruling of the Speaker stands.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
State your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, under Supplemental Agreement Rule 13.3, if a question of germaneness is raised under House Rule 3.21, which I did, and the question is appealed, which I did, then the rule states the affirmative vote of at least one member of each caucus is required to find the motion or proposition germane. If you look at the board, it is 67-67. That means that there was no Democrat who voted to find the motion or proposition germane. This was a rule that we negotiated in good faith. I have a document here that is signed by Speaker Demuth, Speaker Emerita Hortman, myself, Republican Floor Leader Niska. The language here is plain, and it means that there needs to be a vote of a Democrat and a vote of a Republican to find the ruling of the Speaker is overturned. Otherwise, this is going to be found to not be germane. So I ask the Speaker to find my point of order well taken.
Further advice. Representative Niska.
Advice, Mr. Speaker. It's been the precedent of this House for over 150 years that the Speaker's ruling is not overturned on a tie vote. That was not the negotiation. That was not the intent of the agreement. Without speaking to the good faith of my colleague, I will say that the representations that were made in the discussion of this agreement were not consistent with his current statements, and that was not the intent of the agreement. It was not what was agreed to between the two parties, and I urge that you find the point of order not well taken.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, rules matter in this chamber. Rules take precedent over any prior actual precedent of the body. The rules are the principal function that governs this body. We all agreed to these rules. There was a bipartisan vote in favor of these rules. The language of the rule is plain. The language of the rule is that at least one member of each caucus is required to find the motion or proposition germane. I did not hear an argument that this language is to be interpreted any differently. This language is plain and clear on its face. This language is the rule that we have all adopted. I'm not going to reply to the remarks about good faith conversation. We had a very clear conversation. We have a very clear rule. Rules need to be enforced in this chamber. We are only as good as our word and our rules in this body.
Mr. Speaker, advice.
Advice.
Mr. Speaker, I direct your attention to the first paragraph of the supplemental agreement that again was signed by the leaders referenced by Leader Long. To the extent a conflict exists between the terms of this supplemental agreement and other applicable authority, there's no limitation there. The terms of this supplemental agreement prevail. Mr. Speaker, again, to the extent there is a conflict between the supplemental agreement that was signed by Leader Niska and the other leaders and other authority of any kind, the supplemental agreement prevails. Mr. Speaker, by the terms of the agreement that was signed by Republican leaders and by Democratic leaders, we have to look to the supplemental agreement, and that says this precisely what's listed under Rule 13.3. Mr. Speaker, this agreement compels you to find the point of order not well taken. If you don't, you're violating the agreement, and the terms of this supplemental agreement prevail. That's what was signed.
Any further advice? Seeing no further advice, I'm prepared to rule. I've studied the information at hand, listened to both sides, and I am determining that the point of order is not well taken.
Mr. Speaker, I appeal the ruling of the Speaker and ask for a roll call.
The Representative Long appeals the ruling of the Speaker. 15 hands. There will be a roll call. Any further discussion on the ruling of the Speaker? Representative Long.
Mr. Speaker, the rules of this body mean something to this body. There has been no argument that the rule here has any other interpretation than what was laid out today. At least one member of each caucus is required to find the motion or proposition germane. If another member wants to get up and make an argument on this plain language about what that means, feel free. Go ahead. I'd love to hear it. I have not heard that argument because the language is plain. The rule is plain, and this overrules custom and usage. This overrules any previous rule that we have in this chamber because this was our agreement, which we passed. So I would ask the body to uphold the agreement that we all came to and that we passed together. Thank you.
Further advice?
Mr. Speaker, advice?
The representative from Hennepin, Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So everybody else who's spoken so far has a law degree. I think, I don't know, does Representative Niska have a law degree? I'm not sure. But, okay, so I'm just a regular person, but I do have a skill that I didn't have to go to law school to gain, and that is the skill of reading comprehension. I am really deeply puzzled how there is any question about this. Any question at all. It is written in black and white. It is signed by our leaders. And I don't know about anybody else, but I think that when my leader steps up and signs something, they do it on behalf of me, of our caucus, and it means something. We are only as good as our word in here. We all know that. We all know that because this place is individual relationships. And when you break your word, when you read words on a piece of paper, put your name on it, sign it, and it means nothing, then what does any of this mean? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, advice.
We're no longer on advice, but I'll take your discussion. Representative from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. This is fascinating, especially for those of us who were here last term, especially for those of us who were here on the last day of last year of last term, where all these rules that we're hearing all these sanctimonious speeches about today were thrown right out the window in order to put forward a 1,400-page omnibus bill that you could have brought up anything under the sun and it would have been germane because it covered literally everything, the whole spectrum, big giant sandwich of DFL priorities that were so beyond scrutiny that it wasn't even available to look at online at the time. Wasn't printed out. The folks who were here voted yes, not even knowing what was in it, couldn't possibly claim to know because it wasn't available to read. Now, I didn't plan on making this speech today, but if I'm going to sit here and listen to member after member after member on the other side pretend to have this sanctimonious regard for the rules and how much they matter and condescend to us about reading comprehension, it's not going to come from somebody who pushed green on that 1,400-page monstrosity last year.
Point of parliamentary inquiry, Speaker.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Could you remind the body, are we in the 93rd session of the House or the 94th session of the House? Thank you.
Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What the 94th session of the House learned from the 93rd session of the House is that whoever's sitting up on that dais makes the rules. We saw it time and time again, time and time again.
Members.
And we can go back and play the tape, and you know I'm right. Do not pretend that you're standing on some sort of righteous point over this argument over germaneness.
Point of order,
the rules
Speaker.
Only matter.
State your point of order.
Masons 124, personalities not permitted in debate. This body is here today to debate bills so that we can pass budgets. I hope that you will find my point of order well taken so that we can move on to the business ahead of the House. Thank you.
Thank you for the reminder that personalities are not allowed in debate. Representative Hudson.
What about a good thing to remember when you question our ability to comprehend reading? When you talk down to us like we don't know how to read.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
Again, under Mason's personalities are not permitted in debate. Please remind the body to stick to the business in front of the House.
I remind the body that personalities are not allowed in discussion. Please confine your remarks to the task at hand. Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Trump, Musk, Trump, Musk, Trump, Musk. How many times have we heard that? No points of order over here about personalities, but you guys can't get your heads out of D.C. We know how this vote's going to go down. And we also know how votes went down last year. And it does matter because a lot of us are still here. You want to talk about relationships and the importance of maintaining them in good faith? Practice what you preach.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that was really an incredible moment that just happened on this House floor. What I just heard from the other side was an idea that because we don't like what happened last year, now the rules are irrelevant. Whoever's up there gets to decide. That's a verbatim quote. You guys are upset that you think we didn't follow the rules, and your takeaway from that is now the rules don't apply to anybody. Is that really how we want to live in this chamber, that there are no rules? That's incredible. That was an incredible statement. I have to believe that my colleague didn't really mean that. I hope that isn't what was meant, but that's actually not why I stood up. I just want to pause for a minute and say, I think we should follow some rules in here and not just the rule of whoever is up in the chair gets to decide everything. I'm blown away by this. So when I look at the supplemental agreement on line 1.2, it says, if a question of germaneness is raised under House Rule 3.21 and if the question is put to the body, or if a decision of the presiding officer under House Rule 3.21 is appealed, the affirmative vote of at least one member of each caucus is required to find the motion or proposition germane. I heard Leader Niska say that that doesn't mean that someone from this side of the aisle has to vote in order for something to be found germane. I don't understand how the words on the page could mean that. I wonder if Leader Niska would yield to a question.
He will yield. Representative Niska.
You want? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question for Leader Niska is, what does the words on line starting on line 1.21, extending to line 2.1, the affirmative vote of at least one member of each caucus is required to find the motion or proposition germane mean? What does that phrase mean?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Stevenson. The context of that sentence matters. It talks about appealing the ruling of the Speaker. It's talking about how the ruling of the Speaker can be overturned. That was the discussion that I had privately with Leader Long. I think he knows that this is not, that the interpretation he is forwarding today is not the interpretation of this rule that we discussed. It is not the purpose of this rule that we discussed, and that's why the point of order was well taken.
Representative Stevenson.
Mr. Speaker, will Leader Niska continue to yield?
He will yield. Representative Niska. Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Okay, so you say it wasn't the purpose and the intention. I'm asking about the plain language, but my question to you, what was the purpose or intention, if not that?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Stevenson. I believe Representative Long's specific words in describing the purpose of this amendment was to allow for rogue amendments, was the language that he used, to not be brought forward, not amendments that are favored by an entire Congress.
Representative Stevenson.
Well, and will the leader continue to yield?
He will yield. Representative Stevenson.
Okay, so what I'm understanding you to say is that this rule is only intended to apply if the two caucus leaderships don't like an amendment. Is that, am I understanding you correctly? If someone without the blessing of leadership brings an amendment, then this rule applies, but otherwise it doesn't apply. Is that what you're saying?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Stevenson. The words that Leader Long used to me were rogue amendments. And perhaps he has some other, that was how I interpreted his language and his purpose for doing this. But specifically in the context of the entire sentence, it talks about appealing the ruling of the Speaker. Our interpretation is that refers to how the ruling of the Speaker can be overturned. The ruling of the Speaker has never been able to be overturned on a 67-67 vote.
Representative Stevenson.
And will the leader continue to yield?
He will yield, Representative Stevenson.
Okay, so you think this applies to rogue amendments. Where in this rule, 13.3, it doesn't limit it to any kind of amendment, rogue or otherwise. It doesn't discuss anything about how the amendment comes up. It says that if it's appealed, you need the affirmative vote of each member of one caucus to find the motion or proposition germane. So where in this section do we limit it to certain types of amendment?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Stevenson. Like I said, that was the language that Leader Long used in describing the purpose of this amendment to me.
Representative Stevenson.
Well, I won't continue to ask him to yield, but I think what we have here is a situation where the words don't match what the leader wanted. And I'm sorry, but that's not how the law works. I know Representative Niska knows that. I know that the chamber knows that. What matters is what's on the page, the words. That's how this place works. That's how rules work. That's how law works. And it should matter. It should matter to everyone here that we follow that. And if we set a precedent today that we're just going to break the rules whenever we feel like it, things are not going to go well in the last 3 weeks of session. We are at 67-67. We have to work together to get a budget enacted, which means we have to trust each other. We have to be able to compromise and work together. And we have to hold firm to the agreements that we make with one another. If we don't do that, the whole thing will not work. This is a fundamental breach because the words are so clear. And it's signed by your leadership. If you think that what we did last year was wrong, if you think we broke the rules, then do better than us. Adhere to what you think. I'm serious. If you think it's so important to follow the rules and you think we didn't, if that makes you mad, why aren't you mad about this? Just because someone else does something I don't like doesn't mean that I'm going to go do the same thing that they did that gives me license to go and break some norm or rule that I have. If you think following the rules is important, follow the rules. If you think honoring your agreement is important, honor your agreement.
I'd like to remind the body that we're currently appealing the ruling of the Speaker, and I would recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm trying to correct some misstatements that were made. This body last year, it wasn't the ignoring, it was not allowing the vote. It was ignoring motions, not ignoring an interpretation of a rule. Over the years, many, many years that a few of us have been around, we realized that interpretation of the same words has frequently been different. But except for last year, we were allowed to debate each other. We listened and went back and forth. We didn't ignore a person making a motion. So we can continue this as long as we want, but SOP, practice, and etc. has proven that two members frequently do not agree on the interpretation of words in a statement, a rule, etc. So I believe we should accept the Speaker's ruling and move on, or I'm fine with moving that we work past midnight.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Finke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to just start by saying we didn't break the rules last year. It's just not that fun when you don't have the votes. We did follow the rules. But even if you think we didn't, I do just want to remind the body of a couple of things. The agreement that we have heard described was signed by all of the leadership. It's signed, it's got words that say what they say. Our 4 leaders signed it, but we also all voted on it. We voted to adopt these rules. So it doesn't honestly matter to me what one majority or party leader might have said to another party leader in a conversation one time, and whether or not a word was used or in that conversation. That's not how we make rules. It's not how we interpret the rules. We can interpret the words on the page, but we're not doing that. We're actually just interpreting a conversation that none of us were a part of. And conversations that none of us are a part of are not what are on the page. As Representative Hudson said, the person at the desk makes the rules. And if that is true, I mean, she's not there right now, but your speaker did. Sure, that was not intentional, but you know what I mean. Our speaker, the speaker of this chamber, the rightful speaker, the winner of the Game of Thrones, I guess, signed the document. It's signed. We know what it says. It doesn't matter how you want to interpret it, Representative Niska. And I think it's really, or Leader Niska. And I just want to say, I think that this is a particularly fascinating conversation for a legislative body, a body that has many people who have law degrees, many people who understand how law works, and many people who have ambitions. And if you have an ability to not understand that when you sign your name to the words, you agree to those words, I sure hope you don't become our Attorney General.
Any further? I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard a lot of interesting testimony here, a lot of interesting discussion. I found the comment that this was it was stated that this was the purpose of this language was to prevent rogue amendments from being adopted. I wasn't in that discussion, I don't know what was there, but even assuming that's what was said, it seems like a good way to prevent rogue amendments from being adopted would be to adopt language that says that upholding the decision of the Speaker requires the affirmative vote of at least one member of each caucus to find the motion or proposition germane. And that's what this language actually says here. So it seems like it should be more incumbent upon the parties to the agreement to actually read the language so that they know what it does. And there was no, the vote shows there was no person of both parties who voted for the motion. So I mean, and I just want to verify this. So I'm wondering if Representative Allen would yield to a question.
I don't see Representative Allen here on the floor, so I'm assuming no.
Thank you. Would Representative Altendorf yield to a question?
Representative Freiberg.
She will yield. Is that correct, Mr. Speaker?
Proceed.
Before I proceed, I just need to know whether or not Representative Altendorf will yield to a question.
I am unsure, Representative Freiberg. She will not.
Okay. Will Representative Anderson, PE, yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
She will not.
Will Representative Anderson, PH, yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
He will not.
Will Representative Backer yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
He's not here currently.
Will Representative Bakeberg yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
I think this is becoming dilatory.
Dilatory on whom, Mr. Speaker?
On Representative Freiberg, potentially. Who are you asking to yield now?
I believe I was on Bakeberg. I was on.
You're good on your list? Okay. No, he will not yield.
Okay. Will Representative Baker yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
Representative Baker is online, so he will not yield. Okay.
Will Representative Bennett yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
This is great fun. She will not.
I beg your pardon?
She will not yield.
Okay. Let's see. Will Representative Bliss yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
He will not yield.
Will Representative Burkle yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
Currently not on the floor.
Let's mix it up. Will Representative Zalesnikar yield to a question?
Oh, moving in a different direction. Not here.
Will Representative Whitty yield to a question? Maybe I'll have better luck going in reverse order.
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your parliamentary inquiry.
Is there still an agreement that it needs 68 votes to pass any amendment?
I can answer that if you'd like, Mr. Speaker.
Do we not need a majority of the votes to pass any amendment off the floor, Mr. Speaker? My question being, could we not move this to a vote so that we can move on to the important business as opposed to going down the name call list?
I appreciate
the question. If they
the
don't want to
question.
accept the amendment,
Mr.
we
Speaker,
can vote
point of
on it.
parliamentary
Thank you.
inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
What order of business are we on? What was the purpose of Representative Novotny interrupting Representative
Perfect.
Freiberg?
From my understanding, Representative Novotny was inquiring as to where we are on this discussion regarding the appeal of the ruling of the Speaker as to whether or not the Speaker's determination was correct in that when a 67-67 tie occurs, nothing leaves and the situation remains unchanged. Representative Freiberg, you continue to have the floor.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Well, let's try, will Representative Hudson yield to a question? He's usually game to mix things up.
He would love to yield to a...
Awesome, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I knew I could find somebody. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, I'm sorry, Representative Hudson, the language of the amendment says that upholding the ruling of the Speaker requires the affirmative vote of at least one member of each caucus. So the vote, as you recall, was 67-67. So my question for you is, are you a Democrat?
Representative Hudson, remember, personalities are not allowed in debate. Representative Hudson.
We've learned that we can fluidly identify however we like from day to day, so I suppose for the next 10 minutes I can be.
Representative Freiberg.
Well, I don't really appreciate the tone of that answer. The election certificate says pretty clearly that Representative Hudson is a Republican and that the other 66 members who voted to uphold the ruling of the Speaker are also. My point in doing this was just to get one member. I tried alphabetical order, I tried reverse alphabetical order. I would have gladly gone to you next, Representative Engen, but my point was just to show that there are no members of the Democratic Party who voted to uphold the ruling of the Speaker, and the the text of the supplemental agreement rule is entirely clear that one member from each caucus is required to find the motion or proposition germane. So I would encourage members to find the point of order well taken to not uphold the ruling of the Speaker.
Further discussion to the appeal of the ruling. Member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. It's been well discussed at this point. I would simply say that when we're talking about good faith negotiations, it's important that when we have those good faith negotiations that we fairly represent what's happening in those negotiations. It certainly is the case that the Speaker's ruling, as previously, is consistent with the discussion that was had on the agreement, and so I urge members to vote green and uphold the ruling of the Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Is it a point of order, Representative Long?
For further discussion, I'd like to be recognized.
Oh, well, I was going to recognize Representative Hansen, if that's okay with you. Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been a lot of discussion about what was said behind closed doors. There was no misrepresentation made behind those closed doors. Language was shared directly before a vote that is extremely clear that we all sign. And at this point, the question, as was stated, is not what was discussed before a rule was adopted. The question is, what is the rule that we are applying for this body? There has been no argument from the other side that this rule means anything other than what the plain language means. So, members, we are here to interpret laws and make laws. We are here to interpret rules. This is a very plain rule. It seems like you all have decided that you don't like the rule that you passed, but that is not how we govern here. We have adopted a rule. We should enforce the rule. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize a member from Dakota, Representative Hanson.
Sure,
Jay.
why not? Thank you, Speaker. You know, it's interesting because at one point in time, I was raised by a Republican who told me that they were the party of law and order and freedom. And it's really exciting for me as a Democrat now to see that this is the party that's representing law and order and freedom in society these days. So interesting how things change. You know, a majority is not equal to a tie. And in order to make a majority and to make the rules, you have to win elections. And when you lose elections in both the executive and the legislative branch, the power of the minority is weakened. Always. That's Civics 101. And it's important that we understand how important the rules are, because when we throw those out, it's almost the same as when parties don't stand for what they used to anymore. So Representative Niska said the quiet part out loud for us, that the voters really actually hate the most. That the deals made in smoky rooms can, do, and will disrupt the government that they trust. That intentional misrepresentation will be called the truth, and there'll be people who expect the public to buy that. So I hope that we remember our job is to serve the people with integrity, and to have rules, and to understand that when you are in a tie, that is not the same as a majority. It is not the same as winning elections that give you the privilege to make those rules, because that's what the voters wanted. We have and always will stand by the side of the voters who expect us to be more honest than their fears of what hides in those smoky rooms and the misrepresentations of people who don't get it right before they leave the room and don't make sure they understand it. We have a signed document before us, and if that doesn't hold water, I am afraid that nothing in this body will. We have hundreds of years of precedence of honoring the rules. And we cannot let today's politics continue to make us do things like ignore the most basic tenets of what this entire body has been built on. So do better and make sure we uphold the rules and the agreement that we all voted on and our leaders signed.
Any further discussion? I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oops, just lost it. Give me a moment. So there's been a lot said, and smoky rooms and whatever. What I would ask us all to do here is just take a step back and do just read the words. I'm not a lawyer. You know, emotions get high here, but the words in this are just so clear. And if we go against that, I just don't understand. I'm going to read it again. If a question of germaneness is raised under House Rule 3.21, and the question is put to the body, which it was done, or if a decision of the presiding officer under House Rule 3.21 is appealed, the affirmative vote of at least one member of each caucus is required to find the motion or proposition germane. Please, folks, that is really clear. We can, and you know what? That rule will benefit us all going forward. Can we please just read the words on the paper and overturn the ruling of the Speaker? Thank you.
Any further discussion? I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Godfrey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was not here in 2023. I came into this legislative session halfway through and very excited to work in a bipartisan manner with you all. And I have seen displays of that bipartisanship in committee, on this House floor, and I am excited to continue it. I fear that if we effectively throw out this rule that was agreed upon by all of our leadership and signed to in the plain language, that this is how bipartisanship dies. And if that is what happens, let it not be said that it was the Democrats who killed bipartisanship. Thank you, Speaker.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Niska yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I am wondering, and I heard Representative Kraft read it, the 13.3. I'm wondering, before you signed this, Representative Niska, did you read the agreement?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Greenman, yes, I did.
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, because I was going to give you the benefit of the doubt that maybe you didn't read it, and right now you're trying to figure out, like lawyers do, and I will say, when Representative Gomez throws shade at lawyers, she means us too. So get it, but I'm about to bring up some things we talked about in law school. I know that as a lawyer who's done contracts, that sometimes when you sign an agreement, maybe you don't read it well enough. Then you have buyer's remorse and you try to come up with lots of things outside the contract that are not in the agreement, that are not pointed to in the agreement. And what a judge will say is that's extraneous to the agreement, doesn't apply. I also know that this is probably the second time in my career in the legislature that I'm going to bring up former Justice Scalia, but he had a strong penchant to talking about the plain language of the Constitution, the plain language of law, the plain language. In this case, what we're talking about is a contract that we all voted on. And when you read the plain language of this, which I think I will read again, if a question of germaneness is raised under House Rule 3.21 and the question is put to the body, or if the decision of the providing officer under House Rule 3.21 is appealed, the affirmative vote of at least one member of each caucus is required to find the motion or the proposition germane. That's just the plain language. There's no actually ambiguity, and you and nobody in your caucus has made an argument that there is ambiguity to open up all sorts of other doctrines of interpretation. So what we're hearing right now is that, we're not going to bring up conversations about hearsay, all the conversations that leaders may or may not have had. The reality is there's 134 of us. 130 of us weren't in that room, but 134 of us voted on this language. Presumably we all read it. We didn't have this conversation when we passed it, and now you don't like the result. And so you're using the fact that one of the things you got in negotiation was the speaker to just ignore it. Not only is that not how laws work, that's not how the Constitution works, that's not how rules work. Representative Niska, you're a lawyer, and I haven't even heard a good argument of why your side is right. So I think we're all sort of at a loss here. And I really don't know what we do next. Like, if we can't trust the things we all voted on, and maybe I'll ask Representative Niska, do you know what the vote count on this, when we voted on this was?
Are you asking him to yield?
Thank you.
Representative Niska. I believe the question was asked, but to Representative Greenman, you can ask it again, please.
Thank you, and thank you for the task to yield. Representative Niska, do you know what the vote was when we voted on these rules?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Greenman, I don't believe there were any votes against it.
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the 4 leaders who were in a meeting that maybe you thought that this was not the right interpretation, they all voted for it. So presumably this captured, if you read it, it captured what the summary of the agreement was. There are no codicils or any other, the legal terms that I remember from contracts that ride along with it that say or add any other interpretation. 134 members of the body voted for this language that we're all reading. And like the public, we only have what the words are because the public isn't, when we pass a law, the public doesn't get to see all of these other agreements, or maybe why I should interpret the law a different way and not follow the speed limit or whatever it is. So I guess I'd say, I am still talking because I don't actually know what to do with this. You read this, we voted on it. 134 members voted yes. This language is plain as day. We don't even need rules of interpretation. And your strategy is just to ignore it and have the Speaker Pro Tem ignore us. So that's crazy. That's my advice.
Any further discussion? The representative from Washington, Representative DePel.
Thank you, Speaker. I want to remind the body that I did not vote for these rules, nor did another representative. I also want to remind the body that half of the membership didn't show up for 3.5 weeks, and that the Constitution clearly states that the Sergeant at Arms should compel members to return to the chamber so there can be a quorum. So if we want to talk about plain language, we're talking about the Constitution, we're talking about Justice Scalia. The clear language within the Constitution stated that members should have been compelled for a quorum. That is the clear language. This is something that is known to the entire body. Likewise, it's in our Constitution, so it is completely germane to the conversation.
Further discussion? I recognize, again, the member from Hennepin, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to ask Representative DePel to yield because I thought it was helpful. I thought that it was 134-0. I appreciate the correction and should have asked for the raise. I'm actually wanted to ask Representative DePel to yield for a quick question.
He will yield. Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative DePel. Can you tell us why, or if this provision was one of your considerations when you read it? Let me ask it in a different way.
Representative DePel.
Can you please restate the question?
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me ask a different question. As I look at this agreement, we heard near uniform consensus. We heard Representative Niska say that there was sort of rogue agreements. As we talk about it, and the rogue agreements that were not in this, was that part of, as you're thinking about it?
Representative DePel.
Thank you, Speaker. And again, I would like to state that the clear language in the Constitution was that the Sergeant at Arms was to compel members to return to the floor so we could have a quorum. Had we had a quorum, we could have gotten to the business of the legislature a lot sooner. Likewise, we could have been a lot further along with what we're doing here. And so if we're going to talk about clear language, we're going to talk about votes. I voted in favor of what the Constitution stated very, very clearly. And likewise, the Constitution states that the legislature has the ability to remove pay from members. So if I don't show up to my job for 3.5 weeks, should I be paid for that time? And clearly, the Constitution states the legislature has the ability to withhold that also. So you all did not show up to work for 3.5 weeks. While we did, I likewise showed up at my business. I have employees, they show up, they get paid, and then you all required your pay. So if you want to talk about the plain language of the Constitution, which is something that I intend to uphold and support, that is the plain language.
Any further discussion to the appeal of the ruling of the Speaker? I recognize Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering if Leader Niska would yield to a question.
Will you yield, Representative Niska? He will yield. Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm curious, Representative Niska, you referenced there was conversations with Leader Long about rogue amendments and this applying to a set of amendments, but not all amendments. Is that accurate?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Howard. I think I described that accurately earlier, those conversations.
Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Niska, then why doesn't the language reflect that?
Are you asking him to yield,
Yes, I'm
Representative
asking
Howard?
to yield.
He will yield. Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And
Representative Howard, to your question.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, my question is, if that's the case, why doesn't the language reflect that?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Howard. That might be a good question for Leader Long. The language is what the language says, but that was the description or the conversation that we had around the purpose for the language.
Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask Representative Niska to continue to yield.
He will continue to yield. Representative Howard.
I believe Representative Griebman asked the question if you had read the language, and you said you had, and then you did sign the language. So I guess the question is, if the tenor, after you read the language, did you ask Representative Long to change this language in any way? Once you read it, presumably, based on the conversations you had, you were comfortable with this language, you signed it. Did you suggest any modifications, use any different words? Curious.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Howard. We did discuss a number of the different provisions in the agreement and different potential ways to word it. I think that this one is not terribly artfully written.
Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, clearly, whether what the context of a conversation that two members were privy to and we weren't aside, if Leader Niska thought that there was a different meaning, had every opportunity to suggest or amend the language to reflect that, but it doesn't. But Representative Niska's, basically what I'd say is incompetence isn't a reason for breaking our laws, breaking our rules. And the language is crystal clear. Representative Niska had every opportunity, every member had every opportunity to make an amendment to this language. And just because you didn't, doesn't give you a right to trample our rules.
Further discussion to the appeal. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Baker.
Go ahead, Dave.
Baker.
Baker votes aye.
Baker votes aye. Swazinski.
Swazinski votes aye.
Swazinski votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 yeas and 67 nays, the tie vote leaves the situation unchanged and the Speaker's ruling prevails. We are on the Reimer Amendment. I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative Reimer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Just to reiterate, this is really a communication amendment. This is about making sure that we're in compliance, that we're in communication with law enforcement partners across the country to address the problem of specifically illegal immigrants who commit violent offenses or suspected of committing violent offenses. I again ask for your green vote, and I will be requesting a roll call on this bill.
A roll call has been requested. There are 15 hands. There will be a roll call. I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Feist.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I have a few thoughts on this amendment. With respect to the election results, Representative Reimer said that a lot of people had on their mind the issue of undocumented immigrants and illegal immigration. So it's really strange to me that the current administration is focusing on legal immigrants, focusing on students who are here legally, focusing on people who went through the entire legal process and are here legally, and targeting them for removal. So I don't think that is what people voted for. I also find it strange that, according to the data from ICE, that an increasing percentage of immigrants who are in ICE custody and who are being targeted for removal do not have a criminal record. And so that also does not seem to jive with what the election was apparently about. And I think none of us had in mind when we voted in November that we would be sending people to El Salvador and gulags without any due process. So I think that also is not a reflection of the election results. And turning to the substance of this amendment is not going to achieve public safety goals. And I would like to quote a couple of sources, law enforcement experts across the country. The International Association of the Chiefs of Police stated, quote, "State and local law enforcement should not be involved in the enforcement of civil immigration laws, since such involvement would likely have a chilling effect on both legal and illegal aliens reporting criminal activity or assisting police in criminal investigations." The Major Cities Chiefs Association, which represents the 68 largest law enforcement agencies in the United States, concluded that commingling the work of local police with federal immigration enforcement efforts, quote, would result in increased crime against immigrants and in the broader community, create a class of silent victims, and eliminate the potential for assistance from immigrants in solving crimes or preventing future terroristic acts. So I would refute the assertion that this language will protect public safety and protect our communities. I also really find it problematic that we are really undermining local control, and I think that Representative Reimer would agree that, you know, his community and other communities across the state have very different law enforcement priorities and communities, and that we need to ensure that our local law enforcement has the flexibility to really look at what their communities need and what their specific law enforcement challenges are. So I don't think that a one-size-fits-all is the right approach here. And then I did have some technical questions. So I know that Representative Reimer said that this is about illegal immigrants. And on thanks. On the third page at line 3.17, there's a definition there of undocumented person. Actually, that is not, is that the definition? Where is the definition? Forgive me. It's line, I thought it was, line 4.3, forgive me. Okay, line 4.3. An undocumented person is someone who resides in the United States without approval or acquiescence of the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. That's the definition of undocumented person in this bill. And so would Representative Reimer yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Feist.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. So Representative Reimer, if somebody goes to a consulate, say in London, and they apply for a visa from the US Department of State, and then they show up at the border and they are granted entry by the Customs and Border Protection Officer, and they enter the United States, and that CBP officer gives them 6 months inside the United States. Are they an undocumented person?
Representative Reimer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative. They would be considered an undocumented person. I appreciate the question, which already came up in committee. This person would be under acquiescence, which we've talked about before, and this bill would not impact it.
Representative Feist.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for that response. So that person would be here under the acquiescence of the Department of State and the Customs and Border Protection, but not the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So that person who's legally present, who came here to go to Disney World or go to a conference, they would be an undocumented person under this bill. Would you, Representative Reimer, yield for another question?
He will yield. Representative Feist.
Well, thank you. Representative Reimer, would someone who has collaborated with local law enforcement, say they were a witness to a crime, and they worked with the local police to help identify the perpetrator, and as part of that process, they received a certification from that local police department saying that they had collaborated and successfully helped to identify and put that perpetrator behind bars. And they received a bona fide determination from the Immigration Service. Would they be an undocumented person?
Representative Reimer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative. So in terms of the undocumented person, I want to make clear again what this bill does. It says that local government and law enforcement will not prohibit federal immigration authorities from carrying out what they deem to be a priority in terms of an illegal immigrant in the community. And then also what this does is it says that any undocumented immigrant who is suspected of committing a violent crime, law enforcement is required to report them to federal immigration authority. In that case, I would say, no, that's not a person who has committed a violent offense, and that's the answer to the question.
Representative Feist.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a lot more examples that I won't bother and bore you all with, although the immigration law professor in me really wants to. But there are just a lot of examples of people who are here legally present who would be considered undocumented under this bill. And I think it really highlights the challenge of trying to incorporate complex federal immigration law into state-level legislation. And so, for all of the reasons that I stated, that I do not think that this bill achieves its goals, and I don't think that the definitions are logical or are going to achieve, they don't define the people as you intend. I do not think that we should adopt this amendment. And I do just want to also state that this legislation really implies and conflates immigrants with criminals. And we know that immigrants commit crimes at much lower rates. And I just really want to emphasize that we should not be implying that all immigrants who are here are somehow a threat to public safety. And for these reasons, I would encourage the body to vote no. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Perez-Vega.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to kind of amplify, just reiterate what my great colleague, Representative Feist, who I work in my first legislative session, in my first term with, when we on this floor and in this chamber, and even beyond hearing the cries and echoes of celebration when we passed driver's licenses for all from our communities, not only in my district, but everyone's district. And share a little bit of words of what has happened just a couple of hours ago in conversation earlier today. I finished a virtual meeting with leadership, directors of Academia Cesar Chavez schools and police chief of my city of St. Paul and our St. Paul deputy mayor, because information was received that ICE made a welfare check to a family on behalf of Academia Cesar Chavez school, and that the school reported them for attendance for that welfare check. The directors and educators stated that that is completely a false accusation. It was informed that I showed up yesterday in the afternoon to the home of those families, to the home of those students. The family stated that I said that yes, ICE continued to state that Academia School had requested a welfare check. They stated that Academia reported them for extremely days of missing school, and it is not true. The school did not report the family to the police or requested a welfare check. As chair of the St. Paul delegation, a sanctuary city which holds a history of welcoming immigrants, in my district, St. Paul experienced significant immigration from Europe, particularly from Norway, Sweden, Ireland, and Germany in the 19th century. Many of this body on both sides who are descendants from. These early immigrants often settled in the specific neighborhoods as the Swede Hollow on the east side, and the conversations that we talk about specifically with members of the legacy board, such as our colleague who passed a great legacy bill today, Representative McDonald, when we talk about the impact of Irish descendants in the city of St. Paul. And I hold those conversations with our chief clerk a lot because I'm a historian fanatic. Now let's move forward into the mid-20s here. St. Paul continuing to attract immigrants from various parts of the world, including our wonderful Southeast Asian, Hmong, Lao, Cambodian, Vietnamese, and Latin Americans, Latinos, which we celebrated our day yesterday outside this chamber. Some of those countries being represented by refugees who I have the honor to support, create law with, for the great state of Minnesota, for all Minnesotans who are documented or not, who bring to our state and contribute to. We are a community of descendants of immigrants, and as somebody who's first generation born in Minnesota, to parents who were born as first generation Latinos in New York, to parents of those, my grandparents, who became citizens due to the 1917 Jones Act that was federally made so that Puerto Ricans could be drafted to war, and have been one of the highest military recruitments. We talk about these laws that are structured to impact this country, and this law that's being brought as an amendment, the impact, when we talk about public safety, we're talking about children right now fearing their safety, children that are citizens, children like my daughter who has friends whose parents have been working for 2 decades, back to back in court homes, who are not criminals, just so that they can be proud to have an American flag right next to their Mexican flag or their Ecuadorian flag. I spoke with my chief of police a couple of hours ago, because we hold pride in being a sanctuary city, and we also hold pride in making sure that people feel safe. I hope that this chamber works hard together to ensure that criminals are not allowed to get away with their crimes. But I also hope that this chamber in a tied house recognizes that this isn't the way to label folks who want opportunity, folks like your ancestors who came to this country for opportunities to be forgotten about. Freedom and liberty and justice for all. This right here, Representative Reimer, this isn't freedom. This isn't justice to the immigration status. It says we have an immigration problem that we got to fix. This isn't the way to fix it. This is a way of enlisting fear in our schools and our educators who come from all different backgrounds with citizenship because they were born here or they came here and they went through that naturalization project. And I've seen and witnessed, because I love to go when I'm at the River Center or at the Landmark Center, these historic federal places that are the first federal courtrooms, giving folks their American flag to hold, that have worked hard while fearing the realities. The numbers are there. Representative Feist, you said it's listed that there are more criminals that are documented. So if you think that this law right here brings justice to the state of Minnesota, regardless of your side or this side, I look at it as an entire side, as a state of indigenous land that has been welcoming through the most horrific stories that are not stories, it's documentation. So let's flip the definition of what documentation is. Let's talk about how our immigrant community is providing opportunities and workforce for revenue, so that when I sit in capital investment and I see this water that looks like tar, whether it's in your district or trying to fight so that we can keep these PFAs out of my water in this district, that brings money and revenue to the infrastructure so that bridges aren't falling. And so that kids have dignity and hold those stories for their parents working hard at night to get safe home and not pulled over. because we're getting stereotyped. There are citizens that are teachers that were born, whether it be in Texas, Wisconsin, or Minnesota right now, from these schools that I just had conversations with, that are educators, born citizens, Mexican Americans that are being pulled over on White Bear Avenue in the districts of my colleagues that I chair the delegation of our St. Paul here at the state, who are getting profiled. They're not getting profiled because maybe their tabs are expired or they're speeding. They're not breaking the law. They're trying to get to work, and they're getting pulled over by ICE, saying that, where's your citizenship? These are the conversations that we've held, and they're happening even more since January of 2025. That's a shame. That's a shame that folks have to go to work and feel the fear of just wanting to get there to teach students, teach all of our Minnesota students. Our law enforcement in St. Paul, I can speak about it in St. Paul because I hold conversations with our St. Paul Police Department. I can contact my chief and say, hey, we need to talk about what's happening here. And there's information that they can't share and they can share. And I hold that with respect. But what they can share is who's breaking the law and who's not. And when I see the impact that these kids are getting separated from their families, that these kids are scared to go to school, and we have walls to work on even in education when it looks and defines who's in attendance and who's not, because kids are getting scared to go to school and they're citizens. And their parents may not be, and their parents are voluntarily leaving, and they don't want to leave their kid behind, so those kids have to leave to a horrible situation that their parents dreamt for them not to have to, just like your descendants dreamt. Maybe they landed in Ellis Island and crossed over here to the Ellis Island of Harriet Island that's here in what's claimed to be the Ellis Island of Minnesota in the 19th century. I love history. You know why? Because I get to learn about everyone's side of maybe their privileges that they have and the privileges that they don't have. But the privilege that I have, that many of my constituents who tell me about their stories of when they became citizens, the privilege is that I didn't have to live in that fear of them trying to figure out if they were going to make it home at night. I didn't have to live the fear of what Misael Lopez, who came to this country at 3 years old and was deported at 20 years old, the same age as us, and he didn't know what the home of Mexico was. He knew what the home of what St. Paul was. But he followed the law, and when it was time to go, he went because he wasn't going to escape or run away. But he said these words that it felt like I was being tackled. It felt like I was being watched and followed and fearful. So I will leave. But that's this law right here. It's plain. Let's catch. Let's stereotype. Let's profile. This is why I cannot support this. Representative Reimer, I would love to have conversations about how we can make our immigration system better. But this law right here in this amendment, absolutely. Go back to the drawing board. No furthermore.
Further discussion to the amendment. I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Engen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Reimer. This is a good bill, and we've heard time and time again in committee and on the floor, one of the main talking points you guys have had has been regarding federal cuts and how that's a big issue that the state is facing. And I put air quotes around that because it hasn't happened. But it will, dependent upon your vote on this. Because on February 29th of this year, an executive order was signed that instructs the DOJ and DHS to look into any state or municipal level of government that's receiving federal funding and withhold it from them if they are in non-compliance with this executive order. So for all of that pearl-clutching that we heard, for all of those talking points that we sat through, I would remind the body that you can stop that right now. You can stop that bad thing that you claim is happening from happening. Just vote yes on his bill, on his amendment to this bill. If you don't, I'm sorry, we can't continue to listen to it because it doesn't seem as if you're really that sincere about it. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I just want to say one thing about this, and it's a little bit higher level. And I'm speaking, you know, in my time here, I've had the chance to create some unlikely partnerships across the aisle about some issues that are really, really important to me and that are really important to a lot of you about the Constitution and specifically about personal liberty and about government overreach and about privacy. And there's this complex of issues that we've found some bipartisan agreement on. And I just feel the need in this moment we all are in these seats, and there's something really extraordinary happening in our country right now related to all of our individual liberties and all of our individual freedoms that I think a lot of you hold really dear. And I think that's sincere. I sincerely believe in our rights as human beings, our rights to exist outside of government interference with our privacy. I hold it very dear. The thing about civil rights is that if everybody doesn't have them, none of us have them. If everybody doesn't have the right to due process and habeas corpus in our country, then none of us actually have that right. Without due process, how do you prove that you are not what the government says that you are? People who think like me throughout the history of this country, and people who think like some of you, frankly, throughout the history of this country, have been told or have been described as thinking in a certain way by the government and punished for it. If you do not have the right to due process, there is no way to maintain your liberty from government tyranny. And if those things are dear to you, and I believe that they're truly dear to a lot of you, you have to understand that the way these things begin is by scapegoating and deciding who are the people who we can say are the most expendable. That's our test case for suspending civil rights. That is what's happening in our country right now. So I just had to stand up because, I think that there's a lot of things that are going on in the day-to-day level, but we really have to be paying attention to what's happening. And, if today it's that they're suspending the civil rights of somebody that you disagree with or that you think doesn't have the right to have a right in this country, you should know that tomorrow it could be you. Tomorrow it could be somebody who thinks like you. And I think, I didn't pull it up, I think it was Benjamin Franklin. Those who would sacrifice individual liberty for temporary safety deserve neither safety nor liberty. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion to the A15 amendment? I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Moller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Reimer yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Moller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Reimer, when we heard this bill in committee, we had approximately 30 letters of opposition. Many of those letters contained signatures from multiple organizations. I will say they were letters of opposition and concern, and there was only one letter in support of your bill. And at the time in committee, you said you had not had the opportunity to read those approximately 30 letters of opposition or concern. Have you now had the opportunity to read those letters, Representative Reimer?
Representative Reimer.
Mr. Speaker and members, so I did read a number of the letters, and it It echoed a lot of the sentiment that we're hearing on the floor today. Representative Paris-Vega brought up that law enforcement knows who these people are who are committing crimes. I want to refocus the purpose of this bill to reiterate that this is about illegal immigrants who are suspected of committing a violent crime. It's a very stringent definition, and like I say, it's a very narrow bill about communication, and a lot of the letters from the nonprofits that came through in that committee sounded a lot like the testimony we're hearing today.
Representative Moller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I still didn't get a clear answer if you read all of those letters yet, and they're not just from nonprofits. And so for the benefit of you, if you haven't yet read all those letters, or for those who weren't in our committee and didn't know, I would like to talk about some of those letters. The Association of Minnesota Counties and the Minnesota Sheriff's Association raised concerns about your bill, particularly as it relates to due process and equal protection. In addition, the broad reporting requirements increase the risk of civil rights violations and may expose county to lawsuits, with costs having to be covered by property taxes and levies. These legal concerns are more detailed in another letter. Mandatory reporting of arrests, regardless of prosecution decisions, may discourage immigrant communities from reporting crimes or cooperating with law enforcement, ultimately undermining public safety. Next, we have a letter from 6 organizations that provide victim services. They wrote with concerns as well about House File 16 and said that it makes survivors of crime, including domestic and sexual violence, child abuse, and general crime, more vulnerable. Undocumented survivors are frequently afraid of contacting emergency services, including law enforcement, when they are subject to crimes because of the fear of deportation. This fear is often enough to prevent a survivor from accessing critical resources. Abusive partners, employers, and family members further isolate victim survivors of violence by using immigration status to maintain power and control. There was a lot more in that letter that I'm going to, in the sake of time, not continue. The League of Minnesota Cities wrote that your bill unnecessarily interferes with local decision-making. The legislation threatens to compromise good relationships between city officials and immigrant communities. Local law enforcement agencies work cooperatively on a regular basis with immigration while recognizing that immigration enforcement is primarily the federal government's responsibility. Local law enforcement agencies statewide depend upon trust-based relationships within immigrant communities to solve crimes and implement community policing strategies that promote public safety. We have a letter from the County Attorneys Association, again, talking about the potential for civil rights violations under the 5th and 14th Amendments. The ACLU said that the reporting requirements would unduly burden county attorneys who have no expertise on immigration law and do not necessarily monitor all arrests. It would convert them into federal civil law enforcement agencies, but would provide them with no training or definitions of undocumented that aligns with federal law. It diverts scarce resources away from their obligations to ensure public safety and could result in disparate treatment of people based on their race, ethnicity, and national origin. We have a letter signed by a number of the school board, schools, those groups that come to our to the legislature here, and says it gives any school employee legal authority to share students' personally identifiable data. The provision erases essential protections. In fact, school officials would have little to no power to limit indiscriminate data sharing among employees who traditionally would not be allowed access to this protected data. This bill is also part of the Judiciary bill. I know we have folks in here who care a lot about privacy and about data. The public defenders also wrote a letter. Several public defenders did. Again, with constitutional concerns about this. So that's just a sampling of the letters that we received in committee. I also just want to reiterate a couple of points that have been made before. People who are undocumented immigrants, actually, comes from the Cato Institute. It's more conservative leaning. It has been found that they reduce crime rates by committing fewer crimes. More than a dozen studies have found that immigration, including undocumented immigration, is associated with less crime. Undocumented immigrants were half as likely to have committed an offense serious enough for them to be incarcerated in the U.S. in 2023. Cities with large increases in undocumented immigrants between 21 and 24 saw declines in murders, even with limits on ICE cooperation. So what's happening, and with the election that you mentioned, is that there's a lot of rhetoric, and it's based on false information. And actually, what's happening in our nation right now, and what your bill wants to do, makes us less safe. Finally, I just want to conclude by saying that a vote for your amendment is a vote against public safety. It is a vote against civil rights. It is a vote against the Constitution. Please vote no, members.
Any further discussion to the amendment? I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Chisago, Representative Reimer.
Mr. Chair and members, thank you for the opportunity to present this amendment. When I think about what this amendment means and why it's important, I had a testifier. His name was Charles Thayer, and his mom, America Thayer, was brutally murdered and beheaded by a multiple convicted and awaiting felony conviction Cuban illegal immigrant. And instead of saying, we're going to do the hard work to address his testimony, which was harrowing, and he said at the very end, he doesn't see how this is a partisan issue. Instead of doing the hard work and acknowledging the suffering that he went through and the specific situation that led his mother to that fate that day in Shakopee, we had an attorney testifier come in and say, you know what? It's really hard to deport people back to Cuba. And then I went and did my own research. And in President Trump's first term, we actually deported 1,900 people to Cuba. This bill would have caught that problem early, would have caught that person early, and increased the communication between local law enforcement and the people who are most appropriate to deal with it. I think about that man every day. I think about his mom every day. And that's why this bill is important. Because that crime, which could have been prevented, it happened in Shakopee. It happened in Shakopee, and it could have happened in St. Cloud. It could have happened in Carver County. It could have happened in North Branch, where I live. This bill does make us safer because it increases the communication between all pertinent law enforcement that needs to be involved in situations like that. I ask for your green vote, and I ask you to consider, if you have a red vote, what you will go back to your community and say. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will call the name of the members voting remotely.
Baker.
Go ahead, Baker votes aye.
Baker votes aye. Swazinski.
Swazinski votes aye.
Swazinski votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 yeas and 67 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Scott moves to amend House File Number 2432, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A13.
There is an amendment to the amendment, but we'll allow the author of the original amendment the opportunity to speak on it. The representative from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And What this amendment does is it appropriates money that's going right now to prisoner phone calls that was increased in the last legislative session. And this allows that money to be spent to hire more corrections officers and increase their pay. Members, I think correction officers' job is the toughest job in the state of Minnesota. They endure a lot. We've done a lot of work to try to get that, that program that was lacking. We were having a real shortage of corrections officers, and so we're getting that back up to where it needs to be, but we need to maintain the officers that we have and have some that are in the wings as well. Members, what we've learned since the change in the phone call situation with prisoners that the DFL implemented 2 years ago is that we used to, the corrections department keeps track of how many minutes are used and how many minutes, prior to that bill being passed, there are 350-some thousand minutes annually. Now, monthly? Monthly. And now that number is over 7 million minutes. And what we're learning is a lot of that, we're hearing from corrections officers, a lot of that is they're not using it necessarily to call family, they're using it for gang activity. They're using it to communicate to the gangs back on the outside. So members, I think I really believe in this. I am going to pull the amendment for now. But I think in this time where we're looking at deficits, we really need to prioritize. And are we going to prioritize prisoners? Are we going to prioritize law-abiding citizens that are taking a lot of flack every day in their jobs? And that's a discussion that we're going to have moving forward. So with that, I withdraw the amendment, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Scott withdraws the A13 amendment. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill a third reading.
Third reading, House Bill number 2432, as amended.
Third reading. Further discussion. I recognize the member from Sibley, Representative Harder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I appreciate the inclusion of House File 130, which establishes a 10-year mandatory minimum for first-degree sex trafficking of a minor child who is under the age of 18. So the current statute provides a maximum of 25 years in prison. However, there is no minimum sentence for first-degree sex trafficking. And this bill would make sure abusers are locked up and that our children are protected. And as a survivor of assault, it is important to hold all of these people accountable for their horrible acts. And then also there was an inclusion of House File 467, and this changes the correctional sunset fees to 2029, and I want to thank Representative Feist for working with me on that language. I appreciate that. And I also want to thank co-chairs Moller and Novotny for including these two bills. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Feist.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am rising just to raise one concern. I do very much support this bill, and there's a lot of really great provisions in it that I'm really excited about. But I did want to raise one concern as we pass this bill off the House floor and it will go to a conference committee. And that is with respect to the IC POET funds that go to local law enforcement to assist with recruitment and retention. I noticed recently that 5 counties in Minnesota entered into agreements with ICE to collaborate on local law enforcement and civil immigration enforcement. And I find that really troubling. One of those 5 counties FICE does have an IC Poet officer. And the IC Poet program is about, ensuring that law enforcement is well-staffed and the need for it. The law enforcement has told us that they are incredibly overworked and understaffed, and we really need to invest in helping them to recruit and retain officers. So it's really confusing to me that one of these counties is now going to spread itself even thinner and to focus on immigration enforcement. In addition, I just wanted to emphasize that local law enforcement really needs to collaborate with immigrant communities, and these type of 287G agreements really undermine that trust with local law enforcement. There are U visas for immigrant victims of serious crimes and T visas for victims of trafficking. And these are really important visas that were created to encourage immigrant victims and witnesses to work with law enforcement. Over the last decade, about 100,000 unauthorized immigrants have obtained legal status through these U visas. And there are about 355,000 requests that have been sent to the federal government by local law enforcement across the country because they know that it is really important that they build trust and collaborate with immigrant communities to protect the broader public safety. We know that ICE has now abandoned its prioritization of focusing on immigrants who have been charged with or convicted of crimes. And the percentage of immigrants who are now in ICE detention, as I mentioned earlier, a larger percentage of those immigrants have no criminal background whatsoever. So we know that federal civil immigration enforcement is not about public safety now, if it ever was. And so I'd like to just end by pointing out the Minnesota Sheriff's Association and the Association of Minnesota Counties. They wrote in their concerns about collaboration between federal immigration enforcement and local law enforcement that they were worried that this, quote, may discourage immigrant communities from reporting crimes or cooperating with law enforcement, ultimately undermining public safety. So as we bring this bill into conference committee, I think we should really look at that IC Poet funds, and we should ensure that those funds are not going to local law enforcement that are collaborating with ICE. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Scott, Representative Tabke.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and members. So first, I want to say thank you very much to Chairs Moller and Chair Novotny for their work on this public safety bill, on the public safety portion of it. And so I want to make sure that we're lifting up today victim services in this bill. So the bill has $16 million in funding for victim services in a time where victim services is more critical than it's ever been, along with the fact of the federal government is making massive cuts in victim services across the nation. So just this last year, over $100 million was requested from Minnesota nonprofits who advocate for victims, and that money has all gone away. The RFPs are no longer available, and that money is not coming any longer from the federal government. So having this $16 million in this bill is critical. And so I handed out a letter today from Southern Valley Alliance, which is an organization in Shakopee that serves the Southwest Metro, and they have well over $500,000, so $500,000 that is used for directly for housing support for victims of domestic violence. And that money has all gone away, and we do not know how that is going to be replenished. This money, the $16 million in the bill today, is not enough to meet all the needs that we have. And so we need everyone to recognize the importance of this money, the importance of the federal government in what they are doing that is extraordinarily detrimental to all of our local communities. And so we need to make sure that we're lifting up these organizations and talk to the folks that are in your local communities on what this means for them, because we need to make sure that we are continuing to fund these. And so I hope this money stays and grows as we go forward through the conference committee process, and that we're able to get more funding in here for these domestic violence shelters, housing assistance, homelessness, those kinds of things, to make sure that we're going forward. And so this letter from Southern Valley Alliance just outlines exactly where we're at today and why this is so critically important for our future. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Myers.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to start out by thanking both chairs as well as
the entire committee for all the work that they put in. I was happy to see that my language for House File 135 was included in the bill, and this is a bill that helps support officers at our local correction facilities. But I also want to thank Deputy Ness for bringing this forward to me. I don't sit on the Public Safety Committee, so when an officer comes to me and asks for help, I try to do what I can. And this bill is going to strengthen the protections for those that serve, as well as ensure order within our local correction facilities. Our county jailers, deputies, correction officers, they deserve the same level of protection and respect that their counterparts get at a state level. And this provision of the bill does that. It sends a clear message that violence against law enforcement, correction staff, it's not going to be tolerated no matter where it happens. I'm grateful for the work that was done in committee, as well as I want to give a shout out to Representative Pinto for addressing some of the sentencing language of the bill. Thank you for that. And again, just thank both Chair Moller, Chair Novotny. This is a really good bipartisan bill, and I hope we can light up the board.
I recognize the member from Cass, Representative Knudsen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I just wanted to say thank you to both Chair Novotny and Chair Moller for including House File 897 in this bill. What House File 897 does is aligns the criminal penalty for exposing children and vulnerable adults to fentanyl with current statute for exposing children and vulnerable adults to methamphetamine. This was brought to me from back home by an assistant county attorney that was prosecuting a case involving a 2-year-old little girl that was exposed to fentanyl. As he was trying to prosecute that case, he found that he could only charge them with a gross misdemeanor. That's ridiculous. So I'm surprised that this hasn't been passed sooner. Just last Christmas, there was a 18-month-old that was killed on Christmas Day because of exposure to fentanyl. Protecting those that are the most vulnerable among us should be an utmost priority for every single person in this chamber. So for including this provision in this bill, I am very thankful. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Appreciate it. And members and colleagues, we hear time and time again that public safety is one of the most important things in our communities, and it should be. But I think what we have to always remember, and we need to be honest, and we've started to do this work here, is that it's more than just enforcement, it's more than just punishment. And folks have heard me time and time again say accountability has its place, but it's the then what. But I also believe in prevention and intervention. And in 2023, we passed the largest investment we've ever done in the history of this state for intervention and prevention. We put $71 million there for competitive grants. And we said to folks that have been doing this work for decades in this state that we are now going to invest in the work that you've been doing because we know the data tells us that it works. And it has been working. With that $71 million, and I will remind folks that it only goes for 5 years, so we're going to have to make some decisions soon. But what we're going to make decisions about is, and we're going to have to decide is, do we want to keep investing in what is actually working in our state? And it is working. And here's some examples. In Minneapolis, homicides are down 60%. Gunshot victims are down 35%. Carjackings are down 33%. And in Brooklyn Park, and I'm talking about cities because these cities are close to me. And in Brooklyn Park, overall crime is down 6%. Violent crime has dropped 25%. And this is an all-time low since that data has been collected in that city, one of the largest cities in Hennepin County. And law enforcement leaders in both of those cities have said, it's clear the progress is due to community-rooted programs and youth engagement, not just enforcement. So we know that this works. And the reason I point this out, this is the important point here. we are seeing instability at the federal level that also funds some of this type of work. And we can talk all we want about how we don't know, it's uncertain, but I can tell you that here's some certainty here. There's also a program at Hennepin County Medical Center called the Next Step Program. It's a hospital-based violence intervention program that has saved lives and broken cycles of trauma. The reason I mention this program is because it recently lost a grant that is funded by the Department of Justice. Just canceled, out of the blue. Got the call from the state saying this grant has been canceled. No reason for it. Now, what that means is that the work that this organization has been doing, which has shown that the program has reduced re-injury rates by 5% when they're doing the work that they do. That means this work could go away because that type of funding is unstable at the federal level. I know some folks here don't want to talk about that, but that is the reality that we are facing, and that is the reality that we have to face when we're determining what we're going to put in our budgets and how we focus on keeping our community safe. And so I've got two things to discuss here because we've got two bills up. The last piece I want to add, that's my piece on community safety and the importance of violence intervention and why we need to ensure that we continue to fund it. It's working. We need to continue to doing that. That's why I'm going to vote green on this bill. But I want to end with this. We're at a crossroads here when we talk about our democracy. We are. And the reason is because at the foundation of our democracy is the rule of law. Now, the judiciary bill that we're going to pass here, led by co-chairs Liebling and Scott, it may not be perfect, but it does what it needs to do in this moment, in this time, in our state and in our country. Very polarized, we're very divided, but what we have always been able to fall back on in this country and in our states is the rule of law. That is what makes our democracies go. That is what keeps our democracies grounded, and that is what allows people to still believe in the institutions that make our democracies go. And the reason I raise this, because part of our job is to ensure that we make sure our democracies stay intact. So the reasons I raise this about the rule of law and the importance that we maintain and continue to maintain independent judiciaries, because the moment that goes, we have nothing but chaos. And our job is to maintain the rule of law and not to buy into, and not to lean into, and not to facilitate chaos in our state or our country. And right now, we are absolutely at a crossroads. We've got executives saying, and we've got elected officials agreeing with, that they could ignore court orders, not just from district courts, but from the Supreme Court. That is what we're facing right now. And I don't think that's a partisan issue. I think that is an American issue. And if we lean into that, it is very un-American, very un-American. That is what we have to ensure that we walk away from, that we run away from, that we ensure, again, that we don't lean into chaos, that we ensure that we have the rule of law. So now it's up to us. And I'm voting green on these bills because I believe these bills do that. They will maintain an independent judiciary, let them do their work, and maintain the rule of law. And we are saying, and I think we all agree on this, I believe we all agree on this, on both sides of the aisle. We believe in the rule of law. We believe in protecting that. We believe that it should not matter what your socioeconomic status is, what your race is, how powerful you are, what your political ideology is. That should not matter in regards to how you are treated in our justice system. And a vote green on this will say that you support that and you believe in the rule of law and you believe in democracy. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I want to talk about Article 6 that's in this bill. And Article 6 has to do with the Crime Fraud Prevention Bureau that was housed in the Minnesota Department of Commerce. And a little bit about the importance of that. And I know many of you have spent a lot of time on the floor today doing things and other things, and maybe are also engaging in other activities and maybe not fully embracing the comments that are made by other members on the floor today. But I would ask you to listen to this that I'm going to be sharing with you. In the Minnesota Department of Commerce is housed the insurance industry as the chief regulator. And as a part of that regulatory authority, they go after the bad people who commit insurance fraud. And the reason I say that this is important to everybody that's in here is one of the things we're hearing a lot about from our members in this chamber and from our constituents is the rising cost of insurance, exponentially increasing. And the purpose of the Fraud Bureau that is funded by the insurance companies here in the state of Minnesota, they worked with the Department of Commerce, worked with the legislature to actually pay money to hire investigators that employed in that division sworn police officers who have the ability to arrest the bad doers on insurance-related fraud. And this division has worked marvelously well in the Minnesota Department of Commerce, the state regulator of insurance. As a matter of fact, it was working so well and things were happening very satisfactorily. The department came back to the legislature and said, would you be willing to expand the number of investigators and the breadth and scope of the individuals that have authority to act in this behalf? And asked the industry if they would pony up and pay again. And the industry said, yes, we will do that. Then that fateful day of January 3rd, 2025 came. I got a phone call from the Commissioner of Commerce, and the commissioner said, Representative O'Driscoll, I want to let you know before it goes public that the governor has issued an executive order to take the Crime Fraud Bureau out of the Department of Commerce and locate it over at the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. And I said, oh, how can I help you? And she said, well, the governor wants to do it, and so it's going to happen by executive order. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me explain to you what just happened by that executive order. What happened was the chief regulator in this state no longer has an investigation and prosecutory division. It now rests over at another agency here in the state of Minnesota, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. And in my conversations with the Bureau's staff, I asked the question after question after question, and the people that I was visiting with said, well, maybe we need a law. Maybe we need some statutory language. Maybe we need legislation. And I said, hey, how about the whole concept of needing legislation if we're going to be moving this division out of commerce and housing it over in the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension? You are literally giving a leg up to the bad actors, in my opinion, because you're taking away the people who will have this reported to them, the Department of Commerce, and they must then make a referral now to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and they will prioritize that with other work and put it in front of the Crime Fraud Bureau. And the other part that's really interesting about this is those increases that this body agreed to have yet to be filled. And I find it very odd that on January 3rd of this year, we get an executive order to move this whole division after the Commerce Committee and the legislature have done the hard lifting of making funding decisions to expand the number of persons that are in this division, to help you, to help me, to help everybody in the state of Minnesota who has insurance and insurance fraud questions. By everyone's measure, they get an A+ for the work that they were doing. I had as the co-chair of the Commerce Committee, I had approximately 3 hours worth of hearings on why we were moving this. We spent almost 1 full day on a bill that I had to require the Commerce Fraud Bureau to be in the Department of Commerce, to take care of you, me, and our constituents. I have nothing against the bill outside of that provision, but I thought it would be good that everybody in the legislature today, and anybody who's watching, to know what's happening with your tax dollars and with private investment dollars from the industry to help protect you, me, and everyone else who buys and is involved in insurance in the state of Minnesota. And it's interesting that we're having to have this conversation where government was actually working, people are actually being able to get results, but now we're moving that to another division. Under the umbrella that, well, they do this kind of stuff in investigations anyhow, why don't we just roll it all together? No, that doesn't pass the test with me. So I wanted to take the opportunity today just to share that with all of you, that I've been fighting on your behalf to keep the Fraud Bureau on insurance in with the regulator in the Department of Commerce, because that is where it belongs, in my opinion. And I have served on the Commerce Committee and have had exposure in the insurance and other regulated industries all of my professional life. And I just thought on a Friday afternoon, when we're talking about the public safety bill, that you might want to know the rest of the story. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So when I stand up, you know that we're almost done with this bill. So there's a lot that's been said already, and I'm just going to speak really briefly. And I just want to add one thing to what my wonderful Vice Chair, Representative Frazier, had to say about the rule of law, and I so appreciate his remarks. One of the things, of course, that's going on right now in our country is that when judges make rulings, sometimes people that don't like those rulings attack the judge, and attack sometimes in ways that actually put the judges in danger. And this is a very dangerous trend in our society, and it's happened to people of all different opinions. And one thing we have to do as Americans, and certainly as elected officials, is stand up for the rule of law by standing up for our judges, whether we agree with their rulings or not. Not calling for their impeachments, not calling for something to happen to them, God forbid, but standing up for the idea that we have courts and that there are ways to appeal and that sometimes we have to live with rulings we don't like. And this bill actually does something, a little step, to help with that, which I'm very grateful to Representative Curran for, that they worked on this provision. Another little step in protecting our judges personally, because judging has become a very dangerous profession, and that is so wrong. And we should all be against that, and I believe we are, and I think again, I so appreciate Chair Scott, because I know she appreciates this very much, that we have to defend our judiciary. That is our job as the legislative branch, to defend the rule of law, and that means defending the fact that we have three branches of government and they are independent of each other. And so in this bill is this very important provision that helps to protect the private information of judges, to give them just a little bit of extra security, and that is a really great thing. So it's really important, those checks and balances that we have, and I heard Representative O'Driscoll somewhat starting out talking about executive orders that he didn't like, and yeah, executive orders can get out of hand. They certainly can. Because one thing that we do know is that power does really corrupt, and absolute power really does corrupt, absolutely, as the old saying goes. And so we need those checks and balances. And we may disagree about where the lines are, but I hope we can all agree that we need those balances. So I'm just going to stop there, members. Thank you all for the good discussion. We have a really good bill here, and I hope you'll all vote for it.
I recognize the member from Scott. I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Liebling, I'm glad you brought up the judicial thing, because I had written it on my notes and forgot to mention it. Thank you, Representative Curran, for all the work that you did on that bill, because I know it was difficult to please everyone, shall we say. And at the end of the day, the bill is a good one. It's practical for the county recorders and stuff. What they're going to be doing is just removing the public record of a judge's residence, so that is not so easily found by folks that may want to harm them. So members, I think we do have a good balanced bill here, and I hope that you will support it.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Moller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I started with thanking staff, and I did forget to mention the Revisors office as well. They really helped us a lot on many of the bills that we heard in committee and that are included in this bill. I also started by talking about the importance of funding victim services. And in the meantime, you have all received a letter at your desk signed by the organizations that represent those different organizations that provide victim services, and you'll see signatures in that letter of folks from all over the state. We've got a tribal nation, law enforcement, county attorneys, social workers, folks in the business community, medical providers, pastors, and more, because everybody recognizes how important it is that we are providing these life-saving services to victims and survivors of crime. So I just encourage you to look through that. I'm sure you'll recognize people in your community. Please talk to the advocacy programs and the direct service programs in your communities and find out what's happening. And I think a strong vote on this bill will send a good message to the Senate as we continue negotiating just how very important it is that we fund this and the other things that are in our bill. And for that reason, I hope members can vote yes. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Sherburne, the author of the bill, Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So much has been said. This is a good bill. This will help. This will make a difference in Minnesota. I want to personally thank the staff that I worked with, especially John Holquist. Some people have a subscription for the advanced AI programs that you can get. I don't need that. I have John Holquist. If I wonder what I said in a meeting 2 minutes ago or 4 years ago on a committee, John will have notes that he's taken, and he, most importantly and amazingly, knows where to find those notes. So that's incredible. Isaac Pillen came on mid-session to replace J.R. Swanson, who was called away for active duty military. J.R., if you're watching, hope you're wearing your sunscreen because he's probably pretty warm right now. Isaac, thank you for catching on as fast as you did. And to my CLA, Mary McNamara, I've been here 5 years. Mary is the only LA I've ever had. I don't know how she puts up with me, but I appreciate it. And she became like the den mother for our public safety group this year. The nonpartisan staff, John Walls, Jeff Diebel, and Ben Johnson, thank you for the patience with me, having to explain things sometimes, several times, and we'll move on from there. This is a good bill. It theoretically spends some money, but it just covers a lot of money that we were spending that wasn't in the base. There continues to be a pretty big gap that the state is going to have to make up somehow. Don't know how we're going to do that. Most of those costs are built-in things like salaries for corrections. I appreciate your green bill, and I will sit down.
The clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will call the names of the members participating remotely.
Baker.
Go ahead,
Baker votes aye.
Baker votes aye. Swazinski.
Swazinski votes aye.
Swazinski votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 128 ayes, 4 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for today is House File 1354. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 1354, number 4 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to public safety, the second engrossment.
There is an amendment at the desk. If there is no objection, I will let the author explain the bill before we act on the amendments. I recognize the author from Ramsey, Representative Moller, who will explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And this bill, members, is the public safety policy package. You will note that there are many provisions in this bill that we have passed off the floor already as standalone bills, including Representative Heinzman's bill. So I know he voted no on the last bill, but we'll see if he'll vote yes on this one. He's got his provision in here. I don't know if he's even listening. Hi. Anyway, in addition to those bills that we have already passed off the floor, there are 4 provisions in here that are bipartisan and have been heard in committee clearly. One is promoting school safety by establishing a new threat reporting requirement for schools. It has been shown that when there is a threat of safety, a lot of times, especially for these younger shooters, it's been known to other people. They have indicated to others that they are struggling. And we actually have an app right now through the BCA that people can use. And we'd like more information given to students about that. And not only does it help prevent those catastrophic events, it can also really help somebody who's suffering a mental health crisis. They've actually been able to stop a number of suicides through this, especially in Lakeville. They have a really great program. They use their own system. So that's that bill. The second one is making sure that those who are in county jails have access to their prescribed medications. It's a Representative Jess Hansen bill. And we heard some really powerful testimony in committee from the mother of Larry Hill, who died in a jail. So we want to make sure that anybody who is incarcerated in our jails have access to their prescribed medications. We've got another provision in the bill that ensures that victims of domestic violence can maintain confidentiality in their communications with their advocates. This was a bill I carried last year. It really had full bipartisan support in this body. It got hung up in the other body, and I think we were able to address those concerns working with the stakeholders, and so I'm really excited. It looks like there's a path across the finish line this year. And then the final new provision that you haven't seen already is one related to body cameras. This came from the BCA. When there is an officer-involved death, we have statutory language that they need to post those videos within a certain time period. Well, now there are so many body cameras and squad car cameras, and a lot of it is extraneous, like after the fact, as they're just securing the scene. And so those are still available upon request, but we're just saying they only have to post the ones that are leading up to, related to, and right after an incident, not every single piece of footage that was shown. So those are the 4 new provisions, and with that, I'll be ready for the amendment and questions. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Moller offers the following amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Moller moves to amend House File number 1354, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A2.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Moller, who will explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This was the Representative Berg bill that Representative Berg and Whitty worked on related to law enforcement being able to accept gifts. We have passed that off the House floor. The Senate's passed it. There was a concurrence. So it is on its merry way, and we don't need to include it in this bill. Thank you.
Is there any discussion to the amendment? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, nay. The amendment is adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The Chief Clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File number 1354, as amended.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. I recognize the member from Stearns, Representative Perryman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just really want to say thank you and express my appreciation for adding and keeping HF 286 in this bill. Basically, it cracks down on sex trafficking in all of our areas. I think we can all know that you've heard a story or two from your own areas where sex trafficking is rising. And what this bill does is basically strengthens and expands the background checks for massage businesses and adult businesses, that they can include and see national data that will strengthen the license process. So I just want to say that I really do appreciate it, and I'd like to back up a little bit because this is a second time around for this. Last session, thanks to Representative Moller, she believed in the bill, she believed in me, and we did pass it on the floor. However, it got stuck in the other body over there, as you called out earlier, of yours, Representative Moller, and they took it out in Senate Conference Committee. So I was not giving up, and Representative Moller has been very supportive, Representative Novotny, to keep it going, and we did. We also passed it off the floor in March as a sole bill, but I really wanted to keep it in there, and this is a way to keep it, is in this omnibus bus bill. So I will just say, fast forward, it's a new bill. It's new bipartisan authors, a lot more authors in it, bipartisan all the way. There's a few tweaks, and importantly, it's the same intention. We are going to crack down on sex trafficking in these businesses. And we are supported by public safety. We are supported by county and city legislators. It is a good bill, and it's going to affect everyone in Minnesota. And you watch the outlying states. They're going to be looking at us and adopting the same kind of bill. So I also would like to say that when we brought it back, Representative Curran, she was so supportive as well. I think your mayor was the first one to call me that said, I talked to my rep, and she'll be calling you, and she'll be supporting all the way. So thank you over there as well. So I just want to say that I am inspired that Rep. Novotny, Rep. Moller, you believed in it again, you brought it back. Thank you. I want to say all the thanks to that and all the authors that signed on it. I know I've already done it. It sounds like the Emmy Awards, doesn't it? But it's my first bill of getting passed, and I'm just really excited because we're doing it for the people we represent. So my final words is this policy and this bill is a what? It really is. It's language that will strengthen the licensing, getting licensing powers to our local communities. But it's a who. I want to just say that this bill, I thank you all because it is a who. I heard so many stories. I've had so many emails of stories once this got on the floor and got passed that people are very excited for it. So it's about all of us, and we're all good people, and we all came together to support our constituents in our local areas. So it's a who bill, if you ask me, because we're doing it for the people of Minnesota, and we did it as a whole body in here. So thank you, and I thank you again.
I recognize the member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Chair Moller yield to a question, please?
Chair Moller will yield for a question. Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Chair Moller, I understand you might have referenced me earlier when I was visiting with another member. Did you have a question for me?
Representative Moller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. No, it was actually Representative Heinzman.
Oh.
Representative O'Driscoll. Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Chair Moller continue to yield?
Representative Moller will continue to yield. Representative O'Driscoll.
Well, Representative Moller, apparently we have got Representative Heinzman completely off guard on this one. However, I do need to know, before I do decide to cast a vote on this bill, would Taylor Swift be made more safe or less safe in the state of Minnesota as a result of this bill?
Representative Moller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for the question. You know I love a good Taylor Swift lyric, but I am so exhausted from that former debate, I don't have any coming to mind. Maybe it is, you need to calm down.
Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And you can catch our act downtown later this evening. Tickets are cheap. Make sure you tip your staff and waiters and servers. So appreciate the opportunity.
I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Whitty.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Chair Novotny. Thank you, Chair Moller, for including House File 1401. It deals with missing endangered persons. It adds people, our loved ones that have dementia, Alzheimer's, or a traumatic brain injury to the list of circumstances considered endangered. It brings clarity to the law and protects these vulnerable citizens. In incidents like this, seconds and minutes matter. The designation brings a heightened law enforcement response, and it does not send out an alert to the public, such as scene and Amber Alerts. However, law enforcement typically notifies the media who air the information, and this will be something that will hopefully protect our loved ones. So thank you to all the committee members. I appreciate the good conversations, and this is a very good bill, and I would tell you to vote green, please.
I recognize the member from Sherburne, Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a good bill. I appreciate the fact that we work together. We've got some cleanup on bills that have been sitting around for a while, like Representative Perriman's. I appreciate the work that was done. I want to reach out because I've got a second. I want to say two things to Ellen from the other side. Thank you for working with John. And I'd like to publicly admit to the fact that twice in committee, I agreed with Representative Hollins. With that, I urge green vote.
I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Moller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is a good bill, and hope everybody can vote green. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members participating remotely.
Baker.
Baker votes aye.
Baker votes aye. Swazinski.
Swazinski aye. Swazinski aye.
Swazinski.
Swazinski aye.
Swazinski votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 133 ayes and 1 nay, the bill as amended is passed and its title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for today is House File 2551. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 2551, number 5 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to children. The first engrossment.
I recognize the author of the bill from Hennepin, Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn, who will explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, House File 2551 is a Revisors recodification bill for the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. In 2023, we authorized and established a new department to bring together critical parts of the Department of Human Services, the Department of Education, and the Department of Public Safety together under one roof in order to better serve the people of Minnesota. In 2024, we passed a preliminary recodification bill, which just allowed the Revisor's Office to help us do our work and make our work better for the people of Minnesota. The Revisor's Office brought this bill forward. I know that recodification really isn't very sexy, members, but this is important.
Members, please take your conversations to the alcoves or to the retiring room.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to take the time to appreciate the institutional knowledge and the ongoing efforts made by our nonpartisan staff, both in the Chief Clerk's office and the Revisor's office, and then, of course, all of our committee staff. They help us do this work, and this bill helps make our work, again, work better for Minnesota's children, youth, and families. This is purely technical bill, and I believe my co-chair is wanting to just make a brief remark as well.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Chair Kotyza-Witthuhn. I have checked. There are no nefarious plots within this bill that I can surmise. I didn't trust myself, so I had somebody else check. They too confirmed it, so colleagues, we can make the Revisor's Office life a little easier by supporting this recodification bill through the process.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill a third reading.
Third reading, House File number 2551.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, members, this is a good bill. It helps the work that we've already done work better, and I hope that we see a full green board. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members participating remotely.
Baker.
Baker votes aye.
Baker votes aye. Swazinski.
Swazinski, aye.
Swazinski votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 132 ayes and 2 nays, the bill is passed and its title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for today is House File 3022. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 3022, number 2 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to legislative enactments.
I recognize the author from Anoka, Representative Scott, who will explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is the annual Revisors bill. Thankfully, it's not really all that thick this year. They're so good at their jobs. It is a little known fact that there are 49 sections that just add a comma. That's all they do. So 49 sections, and members, I would encourage a yes vote.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill a third reading.
Third reading, House File number 3022.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I don't have anything more to add. Representative Scott, great job. Vote green.
Further discussion? Representative Scott.
I encourage a green vote.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members participating remotely.
Baker.
Baker votes aye.
Baker votes aye. Swazinski.
Swazinski, aye.
Swazinski votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 128 ayes and 4 nays, the bill is passed and the title is agreed to. Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there's no objection, we will take action on these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail. Announcements. I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is Arbor Day. And that means you're going to get some trees. So we're going to be very quick here. I won't give you the whole history, but I do want to thank the members and the staff who helped this morning in preparing the trees for you. So Representative Gilman, Representative Franson, Representative Fisher, and multiple staff helping out. We have 3 varieties of trees for you, so you will have choice. To make it as easy as possible, we will have 1 cart brought up front, and there will be 3 carts of trees in back. As you leave, you could pick up a tree or 2. We have 200 trees, and I believe we're going to start with Representative Vang to tell us about the trees, go to Representative Fisher to tell us how to plant the trees, and then finish with Representative Heinzman. And we will be quick.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Vang.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So the first tree we have here is the northern red oak. It is an oak tree in the red oak group. It is a native of North America and eastern and central United States and southeast and south central Canada. And it can be cultivated in gardens and parks. It prefers good soil that is slightly acidic, and often they call it the red oak. It's just distinguishing it from the southern red oak, and also known as the Spanish oak. The second tree is called the eastern white pine, or the northern white pine. It's a large pine native to eastern North America and occurs. Sorry, I'm just reading off Wikipedia right here. But it is called the white pine tree here. And I think that is it.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Real quickly, when you receive your tree today, several things to keep in mind when you're getting ready to plant it. Number one, keep the roots moist until you get it planted. When you're planting it, dig a hole about twice as large as it is and about 8 inches deeper than the root length is, so give you plenty of room to spread the roots out in the hole. Then once you've got it in the hole, make sure that you've got the dirt going back on, pack it down so that you don't have any air bubbles in it, and then make sure that the dirt is slightly above where the root line is. And then finally, you want to make sure to water it very, very well, and then put some mulch around it, but put it around in such a way that it's not coming up against the bark itself, so it makes it like a little volcano with the tree being in the middle of the depression of there, so that the bark can help the mulch can help keep it moist. And with that, thank you.
I recognize the member from Crow Wing, Representative Heinzman.
Members, it's Friday. We all want to go home. Just want to make sure that we give extra thanks to Schumachers for working with Republicans and Democrats to get trees before the body today so that we can all go home, plant a tree. And for those of us that might dabble in logging here and there, always remember to plant 2 for every one you cut.
Any further announcements? Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 11 a.m. Monday, April 28, 2025.
Representative Niska moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 11 a.m. Monday, April 28, 2025. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails. Representative Niska.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Niska moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and the House stands adjourned until 11 a.m. Monday, April 28th, 2025.